States. But, Mr. Speaker, before I go into the details, I want to be very clear with this House that while this statement will focus on the process surrounding Peter Mandelson's vetting and appointment, at the heart of this, there is also a judgment I made that was wrong.
The name had been submitted to the King as Minister's recommendation. The Prime Minister had made an announcement that Mandelson was his nominee without caveats. The British government had sought agrément, the formal diplomatic process for a host government accepting a nominee from the US government, and that had been obtained before I arrived in post. A position taken from the Cabinet Office was that there was no need to vet Mandelson.
Mr. Speaker, I know many members across the House will find these facts to be incredible. To that, I can only say they are right. It beggars belief that throughout the whole timeline of events, officials in the Foreign Office saw fit to withhold this information from the most senior ministers in our system in government.
This was not due process. Everyone knows the price of misleading the House. Will the Prime Minister finally take responsibility and go?
Yeah! Mr. Speaker, let's be absolutely clear. Before Mandelson took up his post, UKSV recommended with red flags that clearance should be denied, and there was high concern that that was not brought to my attention or the attention of the Foreign Secretary at the time or subsequently is a very serious error of judgment. She rushed to judgment as she always did, just like the Iran war. Mr. Speaker, I was elected by the British people because they let the country down for 14 long years. Whatever she says, whatever noise they make, nothing is going to distract me from delivering for our country.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
St George's Day one and all. Best day of the year. Well, I'm English, so I would say that. I'm sure that I've just poured my tea all over my desk. That's a shame. I know. Let's not look down there. Anyway, happy St George's Day one and all. I'm going to give you a show full of news covered in tea stains. I'm pleased to say that I am joined today by the marvellous Philip Ingram, MBE. No less, former senior military intelligence officer. I might need a new run order printed. I was very excited waving to everyone in the gallery.
Excited, yes. Yeah. But you know, how appropriate is it spilling your tea on St George's Day? A good cup of English char.
Or maybe it's sort of, you know, to use American slang, it's sort of symbolic of spilling the tea. Going to spill the tea on Hermer, right? I am going to need a new run order. I'm sorry, Ted. I've just sort of completely vandalised that one. It's saturated, and I've used it to mop up the rest of the tea as well. Right, OK. Hold on. I do need it in parts. Here we are. Let us talk, first of all, about the big news story today, I suppose, is Shabana Mahmood giving France yet more time, more money, a top-up on what they already receive in order to patrol the beaches. And apparently they're now going to be sending riot police over. OK. All very well, but we're not dealing with riots. We're trying to stop people getting into boats, and thus far, the police in France, due to demands from their unions and so on and so forth, don't want to get their loafers wet.
Well, you know, I haven't read that we're sending riot police from the UK.
No, not from the UK. I think it'll be French.
So it'll be French riot police who are still subject to the same unions that have said you can't get your feet wet, and therefore, you know, I don't understand what's different in this apart from we've offered them £500 million more, or up front. With the possibility of another 160 million on top of that, if on a results base. You know, what we should be doing is scooping them up mid-channel in a landing craft. Oops, we don't have any landing craft because Defence doesn't have any money. And then driving them straight across the channel again and putting them out onto the beaches. Yeah. And if we pick them up on the beaches in Calais, we could deposit them in Normandy and have a historical reenactment.
But the thing is this. They seem to be throwing a lot of money at video surveillance technologies, heat-seeking cameras, drones, gathering intelligence. Well, that's great. You can film these things as much as you like. They're not hard to spot. Let's be fair. Most journalists can go and stand on the beaches in Calais and see the boats departing. It doesn't take a gazillion loads of surveillance equipment. What it does take is people who are actually going to intercept things. And when you look at the record thus far from the French in terms of interceptions, it is absolutely paltry. I think it's about 6 vessels is all that they've managed to stop.
But the French don't want to keep them. The French want them to come across the channel because it's our problem then. You know, if they're still stuck in Calais, it's a French problem, and it's a local French problem. So the local French mayor in Calais is going, I want rid of these people. There's 2 ways of getting rid of them. You either arrest them and put them into somewhere that the French taxpayer has to pay for them, or you turn a blind eye to them getting across the channel and clearing off. So,
I mean, what... Is there anything else, frankly, that we could do and the French could do that is within the bounds of the ECHR and the maritime treaties and all these things that we're not supposed to be breaking?
From a legal perspective, there are things that we could do, but they are strictly illegal. They would stop it tomorrow. But from a legal perspective, yeah, there are things that we could do, but it's trying to do it in with a level of cooperation that you're getting across international law enforcement agencies. And Keir Starmer talks a good talk whenever he was running up the election, turning around saying he's going to treat the gangs, the gang leaders as if they were terrorist organisations, prosecute them in the same way, smash the gangs is what we heard about. You could get into that if you actually had a robust way of dealing with it. But that would take increased cooperation between the French police, we've seen that they're not cooperating, and other police forces that are around the world. They are working very well together from an intelligence perspective. They'll know a lot of what's going on, but there needs to be robust action, and there needs to be more robust action in the middle of the channel. But the place where we could make an even bigger difference is a more robust action at home, because the incentives still remain here, and those are totally within the control of this government. Remain here for individuals to come across. If you took those incentives away, we didn't give them accommodation, we didn't give them allowances, we put them into camps so that they were held securely pending an application. But as that application's looked at very rapidly, if they're refused, and it should be dealt with within 7 days, refused and chucked out of the country. If they haven't got identification, if they can't prove who they're from, you don't believe their application. They have to provide some form of proof that's there.
But that's the thing. If people have thrown out their documents saying where they've come from, how do you chuck them out of the country?
Well, you turn around and make it illegal to come in without any form of documentation
whatsoever.
But then
if they turn up on the beach...
Well, if they turn up on the beach, you then have a third-party country, like the Rwanda plan. Where you send them to so that they can then go and apply back to wherever they've come from to get hold of the documentation or get their relatives or get... Because look at the majority of these people. They are fighting-aged men. That's the majority that's coming in. They have left... If they've got families, their families back in their home countries. And therefore, they haven't got nowhere that they can go back and get proof of who they are and get their documentation, all the rest that's sent to them. They have. They've got people back in their home countries that they can do that. We can facilitate that. We can give them a telephone allowance of 10 minutes a week to phone home and say, please send me a copy of my passport to this fax number, if faxes still exist or whatever. But, there are ways of doing it, but get them out of this country. And there was a plan in place. It wasn't perfect, but it never been tried. And we need to get back to that plan again, because unless we de-incentivize people from coming into this country, they're going to keep coming and coming and coming.
I mean, the difficulty is the one way to unplug things very quickly, which they could do in Parliament today, is to turn around and say, if they've got a big majority, we're going to get rid of the entire Human Rights Act, where all the ECHR legislation has been imprinted, and then from doing that, they could do whatever they wanted, but they just won't.
Yeah, but I think the Human Rights Act is used as an excuse. You look at France. There have been numerous stories of French of Muslim preachers inside France preaching against the French beliefs and all the rest of it. They've been deported the next day.
Yeah.
You look at Denmark, you look at Germany, you look at her deporting people. They still have to apply European Court of Human Rights legislation. The difference is their courts interpret it differently to our courts. So actually, what we need to do is bring a law in to turn around our courts, and instead of going, let's interpret this from yes, you can stay, to let's interpret this from no, get out. And we're not letting you stay perspective, and you change the perspective. Now, that would mean forcing the Attorney General to change the direction that, and that oversight that there is for the judiciary. And our judiciary seems to be very, the ones that are dealing with this, certainly anti-UK. This do-goody lawyer group that's out there would need to change that mindset. That can be changed legislatively tomorrow, as you say.
Hermer, the Attorney General.
Your friend. Your best mate.
Never met the man. I'd be interested to meet him, actually. I'd love to actually sit there and interview him and just ask 1,000 questions.
Yeah.
Why? Why all these cases?
Yeah.
And don't give me cab bank, because you're doing things no win, no fee. You're doing things pro bono. You chose to represent all of these people versus the UK government. And how is it that somebody whose history as a barrister is so anti-UK interests, it reads like the who's who of, you know, the UK's enemies that he's represented, that he's defended, but going as far as pushing for the UK taxpayer to pay compensation to people who turned out to be terrorists connected to the IRGC, who claimed that they had suffered various things in Iraq, and he was told this is probably a load of bunkum. And he pushed and pushed and pushed anyway for almost 10 years. And you ask yourself, how does this person get directly appointed, a political appointment, Starmer's biggest political appointment? Hermer was not an MP, as would be normal, practising a barrister who was also an MP, as is normal for the Attorney General, or Shadow Attorney General, which of course at one point was Emily Thornberry. No, Starmer wanted his chum specifically for that role. And if you're going to be a minister, standard practice for Prime Minister and ministers is you don't face vetting in the same way that you would do in the civil service, because it's a democracy, and so you cannot block political positions based upon democratic choices. But Hermer wasn't elected, he was appointed, and he has oversight to massive decisions, whether we're talking the Chagos Islands, whether we're talking the legality of whether we could say to America, you can't use your air bases, whether we're talking about the prescription or lack of the IRGC. And then we look at this man's track record, and to me, it's a bit like suggesting that Jimmy Savile run a kindergarten, putting someone like Hermer as Attorney General. It's crazy.
Let's look at some of the issues here. As the Attorney General, he's the legal advisor to the Prime Minister and to the government. And therefore, if we look at a lot of the legal advice that has been coming out of him, it's to do with the Chagos Islands. A highly sensitive US military base, requiring an understanding of what the US is doing there, so you can frame your legal advice. Legal advice to the government on dealing with the Russian shadow fleet that's going on. The Prime Minister turned around and said we're going to board it, and all of a sudden then there was legal.
Hermer turned around and said no, you can't do that.
Legal advice with regard to the legacy bill in Northern Ireland and what our Northern Ireland veterans got up to and everything else. And therefore, the person that's providing that level of advice has to have access to, because I've worked with a lot of lawyers in places, the very highest level of intelligence, everything that is more sensitive than even Peter Mandelson would have had access to. What was Lord Hermer's vetting status? Was he actually formally vetted? What did the UK SV Security Vetting Organisation say about him in the recommendations? And has he got his strap-free clearance, which we keep hearing about, from Peter Mandelson? I'd love to see all of that, because he, as you say, he was a political appointee. Now, if it was an elected political appointee who's made into be a minister, there are certain slightly different rules that where individuals can be risk managed. But Lord Hermer is in a position where there is no one that can risk manage what he has to see to make a legal judgment on it, because he can legally turn around and say, you have to provide that to me. He's in this unique position that he needs to be cleared to the highest level, and everything that's coming out of him seems so anti-British. That's my personal opinion. I've got the alarm bells ringing.
Is it an opinion when a barrister seems to have just taken case after case after case, trying to squeeze the UK government for some sort of compensation or charge them with wrongdoing, and instead take the sides of hostile nations, terrorist organisations, actual terrorists? I mean, in any other country, if there was this lawyer who kept doing, you know, the state versus whatever it may be, Mohammed, blow your brains out, and over again they kept doing this doggedly for about 10 years, they would probably be put in the dock. Yeah. Rather than be made the Attorney General, the highest legal appointment in the land. And the decisions that we believe, or, well, as the Attorney General, he oversees almost everything, but things that I understand may well have been his hobby horses. For instance, the televised trials after Southport. Let's, you know, push people to confess to guilty as quickly as possible. Let's get them all banged up and let's televise it, which I think was one of the most macabre, dystopian, disturbing things that's ever happened in the United Kingdom. Well, my understanding is that that came from Hermer. And again, you know, people keep looking at Starmer going, why did he push so hard to have Mandelson? I want to understand this relationship with Hermer. Who is the more senior figure in that relationship?
Well, you know, there's a number of different relationships that need to come out, and this is where I think, you know, the Emily Thornberry's select committee is not necessarily the one to do it. There needs to be something else that looks at it. There's a relationship between Hermer and Starmer. There's a relationship between Hermer, Starmer, and Lord Ali. There's a relationship between Hermer, Mandelson, Starmer, and Lord Ali. There's a relationship between Morgan McSweeney. You know, so there's everything at the core, at the central core of government that seems to be questionable, and where there's question marks hanging over it, and where you've got this sort of feeling in the back of your neck where you're thinking something's not quite right, this gut feeling, it usually means that something's not quite right.
A lot is not right. It's also, there's another chap called Philip Sands, who, you know, is part of their little barrister cohort, the human rights lawyers, who will set up a chambers together. I kind of feel like they almost troll us. You know, they called this chambers Matrix.
Well, yes.
Which, you know, they sort of set up in all of the main political cities. They're going to rename it as London. The Borg. The Borg. Our very own Bilderberg. But no, there is something sort of, even there, the sense of entitlement, it's a bit like there's the law and then we're above it. We decide, actually, instead of governments, even instead of supranational agencies, what we say goes.
Well, and it's destroying our international relations, you know, because remember there'll have been that legal opinion as to whether we could support the United States, and the United States didn't ask us to actually support them in their bombing campaign and all the rest of it. They just wanted to use the bases that we've let them use for decades, for what they've been using beforehand, what they continue to use anyway, and everything else. There's the legal opinion on what we're doing with the Russian shadow fleet. Whilst the rest of the world is standing up to the Russians, we're not. You know, whilst the rest of the world is standing up to the Iranians, or has been trying to do that, we're not. You know, the Iranians attacked the Americans in the last 12 months before they started bombing 140 times. Just imagine yourself standing in a boxing ring, and you've got a number of people coming up to you, and you get punched or hit or kicked or spat at or stabbed 140 times before you respond. That's what we were asking the Americans to do. They were going to respond at some stage. So it's really easy to criticise, but if you put it into context, that context isn't coming out properly. I
have said a gazillion times, and I keep saying to people I know in America, crying out loud, get some in Congress to subpoena everything surrounding the Chagos Islands. You can, it's your airbase. Demand to see the minutes of those meetings, who is involved, the legal advice, who's being paid what, who's got connections to what. Make these people come and testify in front of Congress, because I think that it's a Pandora's box. There's something in this.
Keir Starmer turned around. Here's where I'm going to prove a lie. Keir Starmer turned around and said he wasn't going to let the United States use the Chagos Islands for actions into Iran. The Chagos Islands, and this is open source, so not breaking anything that's classified, is one of only 4 sites in the world that controls US GPS. GPS is essential for US military activities, flying anywhere and everywhere. You can't just switch off 25% of your GPS control stations and still have GPS working properly in what's going on. So, you know, the fact that that station, based on the Chagos Islands at Diego Garcia, British territory, was being used to control GPS meant that we were directly involved in supporting what was going on with US actions into Iran. So for the Prime Minister to turn around and say, we weren't, he's lying to us. He's treating the electorate as thick. And that's exactly what's coming out with it.
We need to talk about various things that Hermer himself has said, and spokespeople for Lord Hermer, including he always acted with the highest professional standards, and the suggestion the attorney acted for individuals with the knowledge that their claims were false is categorically untrue. Now, this is in relation to the various people in the Al-Sweady case who said that they had been attacked, targeted by UK military, and unfortunately it turned out that they were telling porky pies. But at the same time, we do know doubts about these accounts surfaced immediately within a week of Hermer taking on part of the work. He received an internal document from his instructing solicitors warning that some of the claims were implausible. The document highlighted inconsistencies in their accounts, including one who claimed to have taken a taxi to buy yoghurt only to end up in a battle zone. And then at the same time, he was consulted by two other lawyers he's working with, Mr. Day and Shiner, over plans for a press conference they were going to hold, accusing the British military of covering up killings. Mr. Shiner went on to be convicted of fraud. Lord Hermer said they needed wriggle room if the killings did not, in fact, happen, suggesting that he understood that the claims might not add up. Now, the idea of holding a press conference, demonising the military, blaming them for subjudicial murders is pretty astonishing if the man didn't think that necessarily these incidents took place. But there you go. Apparently he's always acted within the law. He also said, when it came to the Al-Sweady claims, that the Attorney General had minimum involvement, limited to a small number of hours between 2008 and 2013. So limited was his involvement, of course, that the Telegraph got 25,000 pages of documents revealing his involvement in the case for nearly a decade. Right. What are your thoughts on all of this? 03444991000 is the number to call if you'd like to send a WhatsApp. It is also that number if you want to leave a voice note. It is also that number on WhatsApp. If you want to send a text message, 87222, we'll get it here. But in order to poke it in the direction of this particular computer, write the word talk before you write your message. And Phil and I will be back just after this.
I hope I wouldn't have used that. Well, certainly I don't remember trying to get any job for my mates.
Can you get a job? Can you help get a job for ex's mates? But don't tell the Foreign Secretary.
I don't think it's completely surprising that the Prime Minister would be so sensitive about the way in which he was dealing with a member of his senior team, and particularly a Director of Communications who's in minute-by-minute contact with the media, that he would want that kept to a very, very tight group of people at the time.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Good morning, Alex. Writes Philip. Another day of news and perpetual confusion, as if we've all been dropped into some alternate reality. Every day now, I just shout to the TV, what, why? Happy St George's Day. I hope you both enjoy a tipple in your local Best of British pub. I said we should do things to celebrate St George's Day. I've always liked the idea of a public bank holiday.
Well, you know, what I don't get, and you know, I'm from Northern Ireland, so St Paddy's Day is my day. But you know, there's more St Patrick's Day celebrations in England than there are St George's Day. I hadn't realised it was St George's Day until I saw a couple of comments going out on social media and just checked on my diary that says, oh, St George's Day. It's something that. It doesn't seem to bring together the English spirit, and this is one thing that I've seen. There doesn't seem to be an English sense of identity in the same way that you've got a Scottish sense of identity, a Welsh sense of identity, an Irish and Northern Irish sense of identity that's there, and that's one thing that's missing.
Yeah. No, I think it'd be very good to have a St George's Day public bank holiday in England. In fact, they should have one for St David's Day in Wales. Yeah. Do they? I don't know.
Don't know in Wales. In Northern Ireland, St Patrick's Day is a bank holiday, and in Scotland, St Andrew's Day is a.
Yeah, I think it might be St David's Day in Wales. I don't know. Do you know? Let me know. Let's speak now to Marion, who's in Norfolk. Good morning, Marion.
Good morning, Alex. First of all, I love your weird hour. It makes me laugh so much. I would like to soothe the wounds that Keir Starmer inflicted on our tradition of St George's Day.
Yeah.
I don't know if people know this. Some people might not. Some people do. St George was Turkish and Greek, born to a Christian family, served in the Roman army, but was executed for protesting against the killing of Christians in AD 303. He was also revered by Muslims before the Prophet Muhammad because he refused to honor paganism and worship idols. His name was I don't know if I say this correctly, Khodr, Khodr. He was revered as a saint as far back as the 5th century. 13th century England adopted him as the patron saint of England. Other countries also hold him as a saint: Georgia, Portugal, Ethiopia. I am so sick of British pride and history about our flags being labelled as racist. Also, in 1940, George VI created the George Cross for heroism. So Keir Starmer is turning every British tradition against us, and it's such a left move. Who is he actually accusing? He's suggesting we're all racists, and I think he's demoralising us all, and he's a traitor.
Yeah, well, listen, that's been his playbook since he came into office, hasn't it? He's always calling us racist and far right and this, that and the other. I didn't know the sort of full extent of St George's CV. The man's held a lot of positions, seemed to win a lot of battles. But even still, you know, I just think it would be a lovely thing to have a day where everyone gets together and celebrates their country, because it's that stuff that is the adhesive that binds communities together. You know, the trestle tables with the sandwiches with the crusts cut off and the, you know, scones or something. Scones. There you go. That's a very English argument, isn't it? But that is what unites neighbourhoods and communities, when you feel a sense of belonging to something, when there is a common denominator. And I think that we really desperately do need to consider that. Phil, what do you think? Have you seen sort of the Reform have taken the opportunity of St George's Day to announce a bit of policy, which is they would like to see the King's portrait hung in every school and the national flag?
Well, the one thing that always puzzled me was you look at the United States of America, and the United States of America is a melting pot of so many different nationalities that come in, and the difference between you talk to someone who comes from the United Kingdom, you talk to someone who comes from America, you talk to someone who comes from America, they say, I'm American, and then they'll say, I'm Asian American, or I'm Spanish American, or something else, but they'll always describe themselves as American first. You talk to someone in the United Kingdom, and they'll turn around and say, you know, I'm Indian, or I'm Pakistani, or I'm Caribbean, or I'm African, or I'm Welsh, or I'm Scottish, or I'm Irish, or something else. They don't say, I'm British, first and foremost. And if you boil back and look at what the difference is, in America, from the earliest possible age, all of the children at school have got the American flag. They swear their allegiance first thing in the morning. They've got that sense of pride and sense of nationalism, bringing such a huge country and such a huge melting pot together. We don't.
Yeah.
It's a good way of doing things.
Well, that's what I think. I don't think these things are just symbolic and jingoistic. I think that they're important. When you start having that sort of dotted everywhere, it does create a sense of identity and belonging.
It's equalising. And this is where a lot of the problems we've got in society are because everyone's living in the little silos. And the little silos are, as soon as you put people into different team colours, doesn't matter whether it's football or whether it's race or whether it's anything else, they start to fight each other. I've seen that in Northern Ireland. And you then get sectarianism that comes in. This is, you do something like that and it's equalising. It brings everyone together, and that can only be good for society.
I totally agree. Marion, thank you for your call. Let's speak to David in Exeter. Hello, David.
Good morning, Alex. Good morning, Philip. I hope you both and everyone out there has a great St George's Day today. I want your opinion, and I want to call out the strategic fault line that Hermer, Starmer, and to an extent Jonathan Powell are following with this veterans lawfare. That on the one hand, that they're creating this strategic fault line, not just on a personal level for the individuals being vexatiously pursued, but moreover, in the here and now, the detrimental impact on our serving military. And this is the key bit. This is in the context of ever-increasing war and problems all in Europe and the Middle East. But we've got the situation now where the government are punting out that they're, tentatively wanting to go onto a war footing, increase recruitment, and conscription is coming into the conversation. But at the same time, they've rejected Lord Robertson's advice. They've rejected Dr. Fiona Hill's advice and General Sir Richard Barron's, who conducted their defence review. No plan for the investment. And I would submit this, that they are strategically illiterate in this context. So over to you.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a lot of points there. So first of all, the detrimental impact on troops, to me, isn't just sort of psychological. It actually potentially endangers them. I would imagine if you're worried about repercussions of discharging your weapon when you're in an active theatre of war, then you yourself are greatly at risk. If you're having to spend a few seconds to pause and think, can I fire at this person? The likelihood is you yourself might be in receipt of a bullet. Are they strategically inept, though? Are they as stupid as all of that? The problem I have very often when people dismiss Starmer as not very political or out of his depth or, poor judgment, I'm afraid I don't really buy it. I think he's, for all of his lack of charisma, I actually do believe he's a very intelligent and accomplished man who got to where he got to because he's extremely bright. He didn't go to the world's best, most prestigious schools and be gifted all of these positions. He's worked towards them and built himself a network of equally extremely bright and capable, highly influential people. Although I don't like them, that is my concern. I don't think their motivations are pure of heart and in the interests of the British people. And so that is, to me, the most toxic of cocktails, when you have people who are very capable, but perhaps their intentions are malign. What do you make of it, Philip?
Well, I agree with everything you say, but there's another key bit to this. A key part that underpins our fighting capability is what's called the moral component of fighting power. And this is where service personnel turn around and say to the country, I will do whatever I'm asked to do on behalf of my country, including lay my life down to protect our values and our standards. And you expect that to be reciprocated by the country, i.e. the government and everything else. And when we get stories in the press, like we've seen in the Telegraph today, where it's turning around and saying that Lord Hermer knew that the case against some of the service personnel was a little bit dodgy, to say it mildly, but wanted to go for them anyway and look for how they could get wiggle room. He didn't care about the individuals.
There's
down to the individuals.
At the very least to that, if not psychopathy.
And that undermines this moral component of fighting power.
But this is what I'm saying, in the same way that this is the same man who apparently turned around and said about people in the wake of Southport who might have put a statement up on social media, ordinary men and women, throw them into prison, make the sentences long, encourage them to plead guilty, stick it all on television. That, to me, doesn't suggest a man whose heart is filled with sort of nuance and compassion and emotional intelligence. And this is what I worry about these particular characters, including Sir Keir Starmer. I don't think when... It's all very well saying, when I look at him, his eyes seem cold. But there is something like that about him. There is something dehumanised about his approach to politics as well, in some respects. And all we're ever told by that government is we're doing it because it's the right thing to do, lecturing us on what they think we should have fully adopted as their morality, when most of it, to me, seems utterly bankrupt. I'm going to have to take a short break. Keep your thoughts coming in, however. 03444991000 is on WhatsApp number to call as well. You can call at any time, register your interest. We will take down your details and give you a call back. 8722 is the number if you want to send a text, like the word talk before you do. Back after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello. Oh, Phil and I were just talking during the break about whether you could put tracking devices into dentures. You can. Like, we were just discussing, I'd heard someone sort of suggest that one of the Mossad's approaches to tracking down the Ayatollah's clique was infiltrating Iran with Mossad dentists. I don't know if it's true, but, you know, ever since the exploding phones and then the subsequent exploding walkie-talkies, I'm just like, chef's kiss. I'd like to think that they do all of these brilliant schemes.
Distinctly possible. If you've identified a supply chain and someone's getting stuff from outside and you know that they're not screening it and checking it, if you can intercept that supply chain or replace the supply chain through a legitimate, in inverted commas, route, you can supply anything and you can embed whatever you want. We've seen in the past where you've got senior generals or you've got politicians going to a different country and they get presented a gift and they put that gift on their desk because it looks good. Those gifts have been full of microphones and recording devices and transmitting out elsewhere.
Yeah, the fourth down Ferrero Rocher in the tower happens to actually be, you know,
yes.
bugged.
Don't bite into it.
Do not swallow. Right, let's talk about St George's Day now and some of the policies that have been released and, well, more politics in general on top of that, because we're joined by the brilliant Rafe Hadel-Mancu, Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum. Rafe, first of all, happy St George's Day. Now, as a brilliant historian, just give us a little bit about St George's Day, what it means, why it's so important to celebrate.
Well, St George was a Greek Cappadocian member of the Roman Praetorian Guard who has become one of what's called the mega martyrs, venerated by various countries around the world, was executed, beheaded in the year 403 by the Emperor Diocletian, who basically massacred many Christians, and has become, of course, a great saint of England, not the original saint, that was St. Edmund. But ever since the era of Richard the Lionheart, St. George has played a much more important role in our country.
So why did we bin off St. Edmund and replace him with George?
Well, because of the Crusades, essentially, and we were very inspired by what we saw in the Crusades, and the image of St. George slaying the dragon came a bit later, but there was this idea that he was a heroic figure and will become essentially the best person to symbolize Britain. And then in 1348, King Edward III founded the Order of the Garter, which is England's premier order of chivalry. And St. George became the saint of the order. And of course, today being St. George's Day is when new knights of the Garter are named. And we've just had 3 new knights named by His Majesty the King. The order, of course, is in his personal gift. And England does have reason to celebrate. I often say that England made the modern world. There are only 2 countries in the world that have had an outsized impact. Italy, or the landmass we today call modern Italy, and England. No country has done more to create the modern world, not just by having the world's only lingua franca, the English language. If a Bulgarian and a Korean meet somewhere 30, 40 years ago, they'd have a translator. Today, they're probably speaking English to each other. But also capitalism, that was born in Italy, improved by the Dutch, but the type of capitalism we use around the world is English industrial capitalism, and nothing has done more to raise the people out of poverty around the world than that. But also, of course, there are only 2 democratic forms of government in the world, parliamentary democracy and presidential democracy. In America, you've got presidential democracy, but both originally came out of English types of government. And the same thing goes, of course, with the common law. One of the great systems of governance that we've said around the world is down to the English, as of course is the British Empire, the means by which we were able to spread all of these great assets. Even you think about things like human rights and tolerance, that all came out of English liberty. A very different type of liberty to Greek or Roman. That was English, and everyone who believes in human rights, that's an English thing. The list goes on and on, not least, of course, sports. We don't win many sports these days, but no country has created or codified modern sports more than the English.
Oh, aren't we just fabulous? I love to hear it. Thank you so much, Rafe. I knew you'd have a whole host of brilliant facts to share with us this morning. Now, what do you make of Reform's announcement of a plan today that they want schools to fly the Union flag? They want to introduce a patriotic curriculum in the first 100 days of government. They're even talking about schools having to have a picture of the King on the wall. Is that just sort of tokenistic, symbolic, jingoistic, or is there real value in actually sort of taking this battle for the heart and soul of the nation, if you will, to the younger generation?
No, this is another excellent policy from Reform. Richard Tice did hear my lecture at the New Culture Forum in 2022 when I laid out all of these policies. So I'm not saying that inspired him, but I hope it may have done so. I've been calling on this for a long time. But the first thing you should do, flying the flag, having a portrait of the King is such a basic thing. It shouldn't be a controversial thing at all. I would go one step further. People always moan when I say this. I think everyone in school should sing the national anthem every day. It's not an Americanization to do that. Other countries do that as well. I lived in Canada for many years. They sing the Canadian anthem every day in school. And of course, children remember these sorts of things. And it's if you don't see the symbols of the nation, then of course it's very hard for you to have an appreciation for these things. Symbols really matter. But of course, we have to go much further. So we do need to have a revised curriculum that teaches the full scale of British history. I titled my speech, The Battle for Young Minds, and we have the most radically left-wing youth in history. We have never seen a demographic of youth in this country holding views as they hold today. For example, for the first time in history, more youth believe Britain should become a republic than should remain a monarchy. So it's important that we do change the curriculum to teach the balanced view of British history. Yes, the negatives of the British Empire, but also the positives of the British Empire. The fact that we ended slavery, the fact, of course, that we were one of the world's most advanced countries when it came to so many progressive rights and so forth. There are lots of things that the left and the right can agree on. It doesn't have to be a right-wing or a left-wing argument. It's just essentially celebrating Britain's history. But there's no point changing the curriculum if we don't tackle the teacher training programs, because we have the most radically left-wing teachers in history. When you or I were at school, well, at least when I was at school, there was a slight right-wing imbalance amongst teachers. We still had World War II veterans and others who were always basically sadists throwing things at us. Now, of course, 90% of teachers vote for left-wing or centre-left parties. And it's not healthy to have that in any system. So we need policies to try to encourage people from the right to also enter teaching, so we get back to a more balanced type of education.
What do you make of Sir Keir Starmer's comments today as well? First of all, he's hit out at plastic patriotism that corrodes the very bonds that tie us together. I hate it when people start doing a whole yours isn't the correct type of patriotism, yours isn't the correct type of religion. But he also accused people who tried to hijack our flag to spread hate. And he says, I know what the flag of St George stands for. It stands for decency over division, unity over hate. A country where patriotism is measured by what you put in, not what hate you stir up. Perhaps he didn't realise, actually, that the flag of St George largely became popularised when Christian Englishmen were going to fight Saladin and the Muslims. Because if he knew that, he might not be as much of a fan. But I just hate this way that, yet again, he's used what should be a positive, wonderful occasion for England to celebrate by instead having a backhanded, nasty, spiteful, accusatory tone against people who actually love their country.
Yeah, he can't help himself, and to grandstand like this on what should be a neutral day really is despicable. And this constant idea we get from Labour that the right have somehow hijacked English nationalism is utter nonsense. What has happened is that the left rejected English nationalism and pride in England. Just remember George Orwell's old adage that an English intellectual would rather be caught stealing from a church poor box than caught standing up for the national anthem. The left, people like Tony Benn, Clement Attlee, they were proud English nationalists as well as being left-wing. And the English radicals have a proud history. The Chartists, the Diggers, the Levellers. The problem is that the left today are embarrassed by Britain. They're embarrassed by displays of patriotism. And that's because the modern left hate borders. They hate the nation state. They are internationalists, whilst the right are nationalists. So you can't blame the right for that. England is there. Englishness is there for the left to reclaim if they wish to do so, but they don't wish to do so. Just remember the tweet put out by Emily Thornberry, Lady Nugent, when she saw English flags flying on an estate in Essex or somewhere, and the derision with which she treated the display of that flag. They're wrapping themselves in the flag now because they realise that the working classes of this country, the traditional Labour voters, are small c conservative patriots, and they've alienated them for years by following other agendas of division. And it's got to the point where you wave the Welsh flag or the Scottish flag, it's called progressive nationalism. You wave the English flag, it's deemed racist. Well, the English aren't taking it any longer. Drake's drum maybe has not sounded yet, but I think it's not going to be soon before the English actually start to reclaim for their own all of those great assets that they've allowed to be woven up into the British national fabric. They should reclaim them and take pride in the things that England has contributed to Britain and the world.
I couldn't agree more. And there's also something really hypocritical about saying, you disgusting plastic patriots, all you do is stir up hate. It's like, what are you doing right now, sunshine? Right, thank you ever so much, the brilliant Rafe Hadel-Mancu. I mean, this is the thing, he just can't help himself. He has to accuse anybody who is not left-wing of being nasty, and their support of the country, therefore, is coming from a position of fakery or ill will. It's not real. It's like, every now and then I've stopped reading comments on social media, but if I talk about Christianity, and I'm a very devoted Christian, there's all these people saying, you're not really a Christian, you're pretending. And it's like, I hate it when people do that. If someone wants to share their beliefs or say something about themselves, take them at their word.
But I agree completely. But there's a lot more that I think the English can do. Let's take into UK sporting events that go on at the moment. Whenever the England team go and play football or play rugby, it's the British national anthem. Yeah. That is the national anthem. That is the national anthem. So if England is playing Scotland or Wales, that's the same national anthem for Scottish people and Welsh people.
I've often thought this.
There needs to be something that is specific for the English, so you can bring this. Well, Jerusalem is ideal.
I think it should be Land of Hope
or
and Glory.
Land of Hope hope and glory. It doesn't matter. You know, something rousing that brings you together instead of turning around and saying, we're going to sing this because we're capturing it, which then means to the other nations of the United Kingdom, well, actually, that's our national anthem as well, but we're more patriotic than you, so we're going to get you from that perspective. I think
there's such a beautiful thing. So something about the words of land of hope and glory, the mother of the free. Like you were saying, we gave birth to common law, we gave birth to democracy, we gave birth to human rights.
Yeah, no, I support that completely.
And also, God who made thee mighty, make thee mightier again. Because, you know, I do, without getting all religious, but I do like reading my Bible, I do feel like when you look at the peak of Britain's brilliance in particular, it was largely at times when we were a deeply Christian nation. When you look at all of our great eras of progress, whether it be through exploration or technological developments, when you look at a lot of our scientists, from inventing vaccines to the steam engine to engineering to Sir Isaac Newton, most of them were very, very deep Christians, and Christianity informed their exploration, their sort of tenacity and their spirit of exploration and investigation. And when you look at our country's past, the two things are deeply tied together. And this idea, I feel that something happens in a nation when you turn your back upon its moral fabric, which in our case is built upon Judeo-Christian values, when you start turning your back against the moral fabric and say that all other ideas and cultures are equal and we've got to let in these imposter things and water down our own, well, this is where we end up. It doesn't serve us well. Right, we've got to take a short break now, but when we come back, we're going to be talking about even more disgraceful chapters in the book of England's new lawlessness with David Shipley, who's a former prisoner and justice commentator. And believe you me, it makes for shocking listening.
I hope I wouldn't have used that. Well, certainly I don't remember trying to get any job for my mates.
Can you get a job? Can you help get a job for ex's mates? But don't tell the Foreign Secretary.
I don't think it's completely surprising that the Prime Minister would be so sensitive about the way in which he was dealing with a member of his senior team, and particularly a Director of Communications who's in minute-by-minute contact with the media, that he would want that kept to a very, very tight group of people at the time.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back to the show. So we've had the quarterly update on crime statistics. I can't particularly say there's amazingly exciting reading. Although apparently the number of homicides has decreased by 6% compared to last year. And apparently offences involving knives or sharp instruments have decreased by 10% as compared to the year that has passed previously, just ending in December. Similarly, offences involving firearms have decreased by 9%. Robbery and theft of personal property decreased by 12%. Apparently as well, there was a 1% decrease in shoplifting. Why does it just not remotely feel like any of this stuff is actually going down? I think we have to question how these statistics are recorded. I just think so many people don't even report crimes anymore, quite frankly. But like I said, there you go, quarterly crime statistics. Am I just being a bit of a doomster by saying, well, look, actually there's been progress, and instead I just choose not to believe it or be inspired by it? You can't really separate somebody from their empirical reality, can you? But at the same time, here's another story. Again, doesn't surprise me. BBC undercover filming. Now, the BBC have been pretty good, I would say, on doing these reports into what's going on in our high streets. They did a great investigation, for instance, into the various vape shops and barber shops and all these things that are essentially being used as a front for money laundering. And it was a brilliant report, but of course, you know, wasn't really picked up by the government. Nothing's really been acted on. Now, a latest report found through undercover filming has shown that cocaine, cannabis, laughing gas, prescription pills are all being offered for sale in mini-marts on UK high streets. They've analysed dozens of local news reports as part of their investigation into criminal activity on UK high streets, from Bideford in Devon to Great Yarmouth in Norfolk to Belfast in Northern Ireland. And they found drugs, including crystal meth and heroin, found in more than 70 shops and linked premises. Well, let's speak now to David Shipley, who is a justice commentator. David, always great to have you on the programme.
Likewise.
Now, the sense is, you know, when I walk around London and I go up and down high streets and I see yet another souvenir shop and nobody's in there buying things, or yet another candy store, or yet another barber, or yet another mobile phone repair shop, or yet another vape shop, or yet another one of these sort of strange hybrid grocery souvenir shops, you think to yourself, well, how do they survive the business rates when all the big brands don't seem to be able to? And you get a sense that there is dodgy goings on in many of these premises. It would have never, however, crossed my mind that I could go into one of these and say, all right there, got a wrap of cocaine for me? I mean, this is just criminality being perpetrated in plain sight.
It is, and I think the way to understand this is that criminality tends to cluster in these organisations. So if you have an organisation which is operating as a money laundering front, which many of these premises are, it's being run by people who are already involved in organised criminal activity. So it shouldn't actually be particularly surprising they are also selling drugs. They might also handle stolen goods. You know, these behaviours all cluster. And yes, all these sectors you mentioned, it's many barber shops, it's the sweet shops, it's the vape shops. And often if you look at these companies, what you'll see is they only exist as companies for quite a brief period of time, and then they fold the company, so they avoid actually paying business rates.
I would imagine that actually dealing with some of this stuff is relatively low-hanging fruit. I mean, you know, you could first of all go to all these investigations being done by organisations such as the BBC and know exactly which doors you have to knock on. Similarly, one would imagine you might be able to throw some AI at company's house and look for patterns and say, oh, well, isn't this funny? This same person's name and business address appears on the registered company address of about 320, you know, convenience stores across the north of England. And yet it seems to me that they continue to operate in plain sight, that these raids are not being done, that nobody's being prosecuted, and it seems to me relatively standard and easy to be able to deal with this.
I think, yes, it's a matter of political will, as many of the problems that face this country are, frankly. We could solve this quite easily. Most of these companies are fairly obviously dubious, and if you went and investigated, you could quite quickly determine what was going on, whether there was criminality or not. What we don't have is active, only proactive enforcement. So we should have, you know, trading standards, the police should be investigating them, and we just aren't doing that. So we're allowing this rampant criminality to fester in our towns and cities.
And what do you make of today's quarterly crime stats? I mean, on the surface level, they make for optimistic reading, but I sort of, to coin a favourite phrase of the left, my lived experience doesn't seem to marry up with some of this good news.
Yeah, I think what's important to remember is that most of these stats are produced from what's called the Crime Survey of England and Wales. This isn't actually based on reported crime, and they don't like us to use reported crime, because reported crime has gone up and up and up over the decades. The Crime Survey of England and Wales relies on asking people if they've been a victim of any crimes in the last year and asking them to say which crimes they are. And the way they put this survey together is quite misleading. This is slightly boring and technical, but I'll try to explain it fairly clearly. So they divide the country into statistical areas, each of which are sort of a geographical area, and they sample equally across those, which means, as we know, like, you know, there's much more crime in cities than there is in rural Wiltshire, let's say. But the way they sample, they are undersampling from the high crime areas and oversampling the low crime areas. Also, they only record crimes with a victim, which excludes whole categories of crime.
Right. And then that sort of is based, one assumes, on people who've actually taken the steps to report crime, which again is becoming vanishingly rare because people have lost faith in law enforcement. David, going to have to love you and leave you, I'm afraid, because we've got to take a break very shortly. But there is so much more to come up. I get to keep Philip. And actually, after the break, I want to talk with you about the elements of foreign security when it comes to some of these operations on our high streets. But after the break, we're also going to be joined by Sarah Pochin MP, who is, of course, Reform UK MP for Runcorn and Helsby. She's going to be talking us through Reform's flag-flying policies, but also when she asked a question about Pakistani grooming gangs, Starmer said he didn't need to take lectures on it from Reform UK. Let's get her reaction to that just after this. Put the kettle on, and I will see you shortly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'd like to provide the House with information that I now have about the appointment of Peter Mandelson as our ambassador to the United States. But, Mr. Speaker, before I go into the details, I want to be very clear with this House that while this statement will focus on the process surrounding Peter Mandelson vetting an appointment, at the heart of this, there is also a judgment I made that was wrong.
The name had been submitted to the King as Minister's recommendation. The Prime Minister had made an announcement that Mandelson was his nominee without caveats. The British government had sought agrément, the formal diplomatic process for a host government accepting a nominee from the US government, and that had been obtained before I arrived in post. The position taken from the Cabinet Office was that there was no need to vet Mandelson.
Mr. Speaker, I know many members across the House will find these facts to be incredible. To that, I can only say they are right. It beggars belief that throughout the whole timeline of events, officials in the Foreign Office saw fit to withhold this information from the most senior ministers in our system in government.
This was not due process. Everyone knows the price of misleading the House. Will the Prime Minister finally take responsibility and go?
Mr. Speaker, let's be absolutely clear. Before Mandelson took up his post, UKSV recommended with red flags that clearance should be denied, and there was high concern that was not brought to my attention or the attention of the Foreign Secretary at the time or subsequently is a very serious error of judgment. She rushed to judgment as she always did, just like the Iran war. Mr. Speaker, I was elected by the British people because they let the country down for 14 long years. Whatever she says, whatever noise they make, nothing is going to distract me from delivering for our country.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back. Now we're going to be picking up what we were talking about just before the break about high streets and the sort of illicit things being sold in our shops and the connections potentially to national security in a short while. But before that, let us talk to Sarah Pochin, Reform UK's MP for Runcorn and Helsby. Now, Sarah, before we sink our teeth into Reform's new policy, let's have a little watch of your question to the Prime Minister in yesterday's PMQs.
Every day that the Prime Minister fails to act or even acknowledge Pakistani grooming gangs that rape and torture vulnerable white girls, more victims continue to suffer. Whilst he spends his energy forcing friends of paedophiles into top jobs, why not use that energy to stop this national disgrace?
Mr. Speaker, I spent many years prosecuting paedophiles who are now in prison, so I really don't need lectures from Reform about this.
I mean, typically dismissive. I don't think we should have expected anything more from him. But the point is, Sarah, isn't it, that he was the one who wanted to stand in front of a national inquiry. He didn't want that to take place. When he talks about the fact that I don't need to take lessons, I'm the one who's prosecuted the most paedophiles and put people away, unfortunately, there are multiple layers of his own political party that seem to have gone down a very different road when it comes to response to what is no doubt the most disgusting atrocity to have happened in recent British history.
Absolutely, Alex. And look, you know, I was so reminded of all of this. I was campaigning in Bradford, just up in Bradford last week. And the point is that's one of the sort of epicenters of historic grooming gangs. And I feel that if we don't continue to raise this issue at the highest possible levels, then it will get forgotten about. And also, we talk about the grooming gangs inquiry as though it's all historic. This is so ongoing. It is still absolutely rife in our cities. And it's up to people like me to make sure that we keep giving it as much airtime as possible until a government, because let's face it, the Tories haven't tackled it, and nor are Labour tackling. Only Reform will 100% tackle this grooming gang scandal.
How would Reform go about tackling it? What would they do differently?
Well, the first thing we have to do is, we know that there were recommendations made years ago from the first inquiry that have never, ever been enacted. We need to revisit those. We need to not be afraid to say who the perpetrators are, to call out the predominantly Pakistani men in these grooming gangs that are the perpetrators of these vile crimes, and also make sure that we hold to account the police, the local services, the social services, whether it is the care homes, whoever has been aware of what's going on and not put the interests of these young girls first.
Let's move on to more Reform policy today. Happy St George's Day to you, of course.
And you too.
It's best day of the year, I reckon. But a great opportunity for Reform to announce a set of policies which some people might find rather tokenistic or a bit lightweight or jingoistic or old-fashioned or messing about around the edges when there are serious issues. I fully support them, can I just say? But in terms of there being flag flying and pictures of the King in schools and potentially singing the national anthem, rejigging the curriculum, tell us more about this slate of policies.
The point is that I am very aware, as are other Reform politicians, that what our children are now being taught in schools is nothing short of indoctrination and brainwashing. We need to go back to teaching children that they can be proud of this great country of ours and our history, and be taught about all the good things that we have given the world, instead of being asked to apologise for being white, and pay reparations around the world, etc., so on and so forth. You know, we have given the world so much in terms of law and order, in terms of engineering, in terms of science, that we need to be proud of. And of course, literary, wonderful people like Shakespeare. It's his birthday today as well. Let's not forget. And also it's my son's birthday today. I did rather well, I think, giving birth on St George's Day.
Oh, so, happy birthday. Did you call him George?
Actually, no, he's a Jack. But the point is, you know, going back to what's being taught in our schools, children are coming out of school and not being sure about their identity or what they can be proud in. We need to get back to the basics. Let's teach decent history. Let's be proud to fly the flag. And yeah, you know what? If it was my decision, every public building would be flying the Union flag. And yeah, why not? Every school there in this country, of course they should be flying our flag.
Sarah, thank you ever so much. Sarah Poach, the Reform UK MP for Runcorn and Helsby. Phil, we've talked about this already, but I want to go back to high street and crimes, because what strikes me is when you look at a great many of these souvenir shops or vape shops or mobile phone repair shops or Turkish or Kurdish barbers, nail bars, you know, hand car washes, the one thing that sort of binds them all together is predominantly they are not owned by Brits. Predominantly, it seems to me that they are owned by people from abroad. And I wonder how many, therefore, are directly interlaced with hostile states, with foreign criminality, with international cartels, with terrorism, and that actually this ends up being, if Sir Keir Starmer really wanted to smash the gangs, perhaps he should take a closer look at what's going on in high streets up and down the country.
Certainly they are the front of organised crime. And organised crime, and a lot of it is transnational organised crime, so you've got that international dimension. So if you've got a hostile state that wants to get into a country and to try and influence what's going on in society through flooding it with illegal substances or anything else, then using organised criminal gangs is something that a lot of hostile states do. You know, the IRGC, the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Quds Force use organised criminals to carry out some of their attacks. The individuals are being investigated for the attacks on the Jewish ambulances in North London and elsewhere. We've had the GRU, the Russian intelligence services, used organised criminals to burn warehouses down in London. So that link is there. And then organised crime is also linked to terrorism. Yeah. You look at what was the real IRA. Forbes did a study a number of years back which had the real IRA being the eighth richest terror organisation in the world, sandwiched between Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab. They get all of their funding through organised criminal activities, cross-border smuggling, people smuggling, extortion, etc., etc., etc. And therefore, all of those links are there. And if you're going to smash the gangs, you have to smash their incentives for doing things, i.e. the way they're putting their businesses out in streets, and then you smash the leadership at different levels as well. It's not happening.
I've always thought a really good deterrent for all these sort of woke lefties who probably chug loads of cocaine up their faces every weekend would be to sort of have big shaming posters saying, you know, well done, you spent 50 quid on cocaine this weekend, you've just bought a sawn-off shotgun for some sort of horrible murderous Islamist terrorist
well, it's not just that. People don't realise that whenever you smoke a spliff or you snort a line or something else, somewhere up the supply chain of that, because it's most of it's come through organised criminal activity, somewhere up the supply chain of that, someone has been beaten up, someone's been raped, potentially someone's been murdered, someone's been extorted, and therefore by doing that and thinking you're entitled to do it, actually the behaviour that you accept, the behaviour you walk past is the behaviour you accept. You're accepting the fact that that's the norm, so you can do what you want to do. It's disgusting. It's wrong.
Couldn't agree more. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but after the break, GCHQ, good old GCHQ, I said people need to stop using passwords. We're going to discuss that after this.
I hope I wouldn't have used that. Well, certainly I don't remember trying to get any job for my mates.
Can you get a job? Can you help get a job for ex's mates? But don't tell the Foreign Secretary.
I don't think it's completely surprising that the Prime Minister would be so sensitive about the way in which he was dealing with a member of his senior team, and particularly a Director of Communications who's in minute-by-minute contact with the media, that he would want that kept to a very, very tight group of people at the time.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back. Shall we squeeze in a call? Ted sort of was nagging me then. He's like, you're very early today, Alex. Normally I'm overrunning my breaks like crazy and getting into trouble. You've got to take a break, you've got to take a break. But I feel like I'm ahead of schedule today. Maybe it's just the positivity of St George's Day that I've remembered my English efficiency. Let's speak to Anne in the glorious county of Somerset. How are you doing, Anne?
I'm doing very well. I'm doing a bit of spring cleaning, actually.
Oh, what a lovely time to do it as well.
Yeah. We've got a visitor from New Zealand. Hopefully she'll arrive next week. My husband's sister, which he hasn't seen for about 13 years since she left. So this is her second attempt of trying to get here, because the first attempt was ruined by COVID. But,
wow. What an exciting thing to look forward to. No wonder you're like putting the feather duster around the place.
No, I got up really early this morning at 6 o'clock, and I made sure all my flags were out, inside and outside. And when I go out walking my friend's dog, I've still got it on, my English rose, and I do that every year.
Oh, do you know, I was going to do the same, actually, because we've had strikes on the Underground network in London. So out of precaution, I took a car to work today, which I don't normally do. And if I'd gotten on the tube, there's a lovely florist, actually, in the Underground station, I'd have stopped and picked myself up a red rose. And by the time I was into the studio, sort of, you know, puked out into the front doors by the car, and then sort of through the processes. It was a bit too late for me to take the risk of running down and getting one. But I feel almost naked without it. I'd quite like to have something sort of flaggy on my person, or a red rose on my dress, not so much my lapel.
Well, we used to live in South Wales when the children were smaller, and they did have the day off school, but everybody all over South Wales, not just our little town, would go to the girls would go in their Welsh costumes, and the boys in this sort of like shields and things, swords and shields.
Yeah, and I know that they have like the St David's Day parade, and people put the daffodils on their clothes, or the leek or something like that. And it's just lovely because, you know, there is a real sense in Wales, and it's an extremely proud thing to be Welsh. Same in Scotland. It's only really here in England that we feel forced to go down the opposite route. But I'm super glad that you're doing not following that ever so English self-deprecating path, but instead going out and celebrating it. You doing anything special for dinner? Roast beef and some local cider?
Oh, now Richie's cider farm in Highbridge you'd like?
I bet I would. No, do you know what? I'm a Gloucestershire girl, as you probably know, but there is no better cider than Somerset cider. It's just the best.
I've got a cousin in Cornwall, and he comes up regularly to Somerset to get a day out at Richard's cider farm.
Oh, well, that's it. I will be there. Don't you worry. My favourite place is, do you know Mudgley? That's in your county, and the brilliant Roger Wilkins. I've actually got a big flagon of his cider in my fridge. But he's probably the best of the best of the best of the best, in my opinion. Proper stuff. Anne, thank you ever so much for giving us a call today. Right, now, let us talk about
cider.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about cider.
Somerset cider is brilliant. However, the best cider is made with County Armagh apples from Northern Ireland. There you go.
Well, until you bring me some County Armagh cider. How am I supposed to take your word for it? OK, Ted. He's like, don't talk about cider anymore. Stick in the mud. By the way, I'm going to talk about cider, actually. See what happens, Ted? You tell me not to do something and it has the adverse effect. That's because I'm a stubborn English woman.
Passwords. Cider's not a good password.
C1D3R. But with the Apple emoji. But no, I'll tell you what, though, but people don't understand this, but our national drink for centuries was cider. It was drunk in the royal cause because, hey, guess what? We grew a lot more apples than we did grapes. And, in fact, our production of cider led to fizzing drinks because of all the yeast that's on the outside of an apple. So a lot of traditional cider continues to ferment. And when the Normans came over and tried to sock it to us, well, they did, they sort of went, what's this you're doing with apples? Oh, that's a good idea. So now you get Normandy cider. Then on top of that, they said, look at this magic way you've got bubbles in your cider. How'd you do that then? And they took our technology back and came up with champagne. So the folklore goes.
Yes,
but anyway, it's very English cider.
Folklore
very
you can use to invent anything. It's great.
So you've got Guinness and stuff in Ireland, and you've got your Irish whiskies, and Scotland's got their single malts. Cider is just very English.
The oldest licensed distillery in the whole of the United Kingdom produces Irish whiskey in Bushmills.
There we go. Fun facts about alcohol. Exactly. It's a very sort of patriotic St George's Day thing to be talking about. Meanwhile, passwords, however, because we've been told that people need to basically stop using them. This is from the National Cybersecurity Centre, saying overhauling decades of practice by advising public to stop relying on passwords for protection because they've become too vulnerable to hackers. And instead, it's encouraging everyone to adopt passkeys, a password-free sign-in method. Explain to me about passkeys. Is that essentially thumbprints and
it uses thumbprints, but actually the principle behind it is instead of you having your password that you have put into someone else's list somewhere and said, this is my password. When I use that, let me have access to it. Then someone steals your password, they can get into your bank account or anything else. What a passkey is the device that you're using creates a computer code that is longer than any password, more random than anything that you can ever think of and keep inside your brain. And that device then goes to the website that you're communicating with and says, this is our super secure key. If this device communicates with you using that key, then you can give access into the account and all the rest of it. And then what the device does to you is it uses either your biometric identity, whether it be a face scan or your fingerprint or your PIN code or something else, to allow you to access that passkey and tell your device to go to that website and say, send that special code. You don't need to know what the special code is. You just need to be able to log into your device.
So if people, because I'm a right Luddite when it comes to technology, and I find that every time I sort of change my phone, I seem to drop them on the floor a lot, so it happens more regularly than I would careful. But then I'm sort of faced with re-downloading apps onto a new handset or whatever, and I'm like, I don't know what any of my passwords are, and it's sort of gone.
But what if you do that and you have to get a new device, just like if you're logging in from your phone or your tablet or your computer, they'll all generate their own passkey. So if you've got a new device, it doesn't mean that you can't log in. Your new device will turn around and say, you want to get into this, let's generate a new passkey. And you don't have to do it once, and then for the rest of the time.
But in order to generate the new passkey, do you not need the pass? Because do we need to be? It's all very well saying to members of the public, right, we want you to use your biometric data instead. A lot of people with phones that do that will already be doing it because the phone prompts you to do it. Is there something that we need to be speaking to companies about, basically saying, well, look, come on, you keep demanding X, Y, and Z as your barriers for entry?
This is what the companies are doing. So a lot of this is led by the companies going, right, we're fed up with having to pay out, compensate, and to start to fix things. So they're bringing in, we've seen move from passwords to two-factor authentication to passkeys with multi-factor authentication. As the threat changes, as technology becomes old hat, then the methodology of keeping that technology secure has to change with it as well.
And why should the average person in the street worry about this? Because, maybe, I could have some interesting things in my phone, some interesting messages and phone numbers as a journalist. But, maybe, Dora in Doncaster is like, well, nothing really to see. Why would people bother breaking into my stuff?
Yeah, but I'm sure Dora in Doncaster has got something on her phone that she wouldn't want anyone to see. Or not necessarily her phone, but those in her immediate contact list may have something on their device that they don't want anyone to see or anyone to gain access to. And this is the trouble. You may be have no connections to anything, not linked to anything technical or political or of any interest whatsoever, but your son, your daughter, your friend, or someone else may have those connections, and therefore the easiest way for me to get in to try and find that is through the weakest link. The weakest link is the person who thinks that they're of no interest, and therefore they've got password 1234 as their password and working through it. I can get in through their through their system to attack someone else's system, and that's how it all works. We're all interlinked. As soon as you put something up onto the World Wide Web, as soon as you connect to that, then you're part of the ecosystem, and if you're the weakest link, I can get into other bits using you.
Is there a way to tell if you've been compromised?
In many cases, no. It's very, very difficult indeed, even at the highest levels. And this is where there are cases like the software that's now out in the public domain as how it compromised, called the Pegasus software, produced by an Israeli company called NSO. Pegasus software would allow spyware to be put on your device. You didn't know it was on your device. Apple, Android, operating system programmers didn't know it existed and all the rest of it until the fact that it was being used outside any legal framework in certain countries came to the fore in the press, and then they suddenly went, oh, we need to close the back doors. So, and what that would allow anyone who was operating it, anyone who had compromised your device, and to compromise your device, you just had to receive a message. You didn't have to open anything, you didn't have to click on anything, you didn't have to do anything else, you just had to receive a message. So your device received a message. It would then allow that the operators to control everything on your device, download everything that's on there, whether you think it's in an encrypted communications site, or whether you think your personal photographs are password protected or anything else. No. It could download all of it. It could also do other things like, even if you thought your device was turned off, it could turn the microphone on and the camera on, and you wouldn't know that that was there, and become a recording device wherever it sat. And that sort of thing exists. Now, that's something we know about. Think of all the things that we won't know about that are out there, and that's old hat technology. People need to be aware that everything that's going on is being looked at, listened to, and is coming back at you. And what I'll put out to people who say, no, this isn't going to happen. How many times have you had a quick conversation about buying something that you have never thought of beforehand, and for the next 48 hours you're getting adverts fired to you on email or social media or other things about the thing that you had a conversation about with someone? That's called retargeted advertising. That's legitimate. That's above board.
Oh, do you think I'm going to get adverts for Kurdish barbers and nail bars and hand car washes now?
Come join our organised crime group.
Yeah, fancy buying some methamphetamine from your local convenience store? Here's an advert, click the link. Right, anyway, thank you ever so much. Good advice. Not to buy the methamphetamine from the convenience store. Bad advice. Right, OK, we're going to be taking a short break now. If you want to join the conversation, the number is 03444991000. That's the number to call. Kieran is waiting to pick up your calls and take down your details. You can also use that number to send me a WhatsApp message or leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. 8722 is the number to send a text message. Write the word talk before you text. Right, we're going to be picking apart whether giving more money to France to tackle the small boats is actually a good idea. We're going to be getting into the granular detail of this policy because we're joined by the brilliant former head of the UK Border Force, Tony Smith, just after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back, and welcome into the studio, 3D Tony Smith. I mean, we always speak via Zoom, and what I always say to guests via Zoom, I had someone the other day come up to you in the green room chatting away with me, and I thought, I really recognise that person's voice, because I sort of looked down the barrel of this camera, and by and large, the output is up there, but when you're, so I sort of see at the corner of my eye vaguely what people look like. If I actually like an interview about 10 times, and when I meet them in the flesh, it's like, oh, it's you.
It is the real me, Alex.
So there you are. Thank you so much for being here in a non-avatar format. Now, what do you make of the New Deal to hand France an extra £162 million on top of the 500 million that they basically get anyway, in order to tackle the small boats, which, well, despite whatever money we give them, whatever promises appear to have been made, they're not really delivering. To have intercepted, is it 6 boats or something this year? That's it. When more than that cross the channel every single day. You kind of think, is this just throwing bad money after good?
Well, I've been in this business an awfully long time, Alex, and in my experience, borders work best when you've got collaboration on both sides. So I'm glad we are at least talking to the French. Now, we might not agree with what the French are doing or, you know, the contract we've got between them, but I'm glad we're talking to them because I think we do need some kind of a deal with them. Is this a good deal? It's not perfect. It's an imperfect deal, but it's probably better than the last one in that at least one element of it, or some of it, is contingent upon performance. So when we spoke last time, I said, look, this really needs to be contingent on performance. I'm sure that's what the Home Office team were arguing for. The whole thing should be contingent on performance, and you shouldn't get anything unless... But clearly the French are not going to go that far. That was a red line for them. But there are some things here that are quite encouraging if they deliver on them, particularly the idea of having riot police out there for these large...
Because that to me was the most curious part of all of this. I mean, I was reading about extra surveillance and drones and thermal cameras, all these things. And I think, well, that's all very well, you know, having a look and being able to see the boats and where, you know, the people's movements and mapping them. But if you're not able to actually go and physically intercept them, if all you're going to do is watch them, then accompany them halfway across the English Channel, it's hardly doing the job that we need them to do. So what is the significance of the riot police? When I assume we're talking French riot police here.
Yeah, we are, and they're big blokes. You don't want to mess with them. But, you know, when they're in small numbers, they can't really deal with 50, 60, 70 migrants in a small team of 4 or 5. I'd like to see more riot police than what they've announced, because getting them, like, the problem with it, like, it's like a total support group. Any law enforcement agency has got a group, a reserve group, tactical reserve group, to go in where there's a real problem. They said they're going to create that. So the idea would be that they would literally, not literally, but hopefully, parachute in a large number of police to a specific incident and start arresting people. That's not what they've been doing up to now, Alex, because, and one of the arguments is that we can't, because the safety of others, 400 to 60, 70 of them, they've got, some of them have got weapons, and you put yourself in the boots of a police officer. You think, well, wait a minute, I'm a policeman, but I need help. So I think that will, but I'm not sure it's enough, and I'm not sure tactically how they're going to deploy them. So, you know, there are lots to be ironed out in this, but I think it's a good thing.
To me, the big question is, you know, if the French police are suddenly on the beaches and they see a horde, a multitude come out of the forest to go and, you know, get through the waters, get into one of these taxi boats, that they're then able to try and disperse those people or to prevent them getting into the boat. But what would they then do with these people? Are they going to arrest them and put them all in prison? Are they just going to be stopped and then they'll just take another chance? I mean, what I want to know is the sort of workflow here of, great, the riot police are on the beach, you've now got numbers to actually stop people potentially getting into vessels, and then what?
Yeah, so that, you're right, that's the question I've been asking, actually. So if you remember, under the last deal, part of that money was to build a detention centre in Calais for the French to do exactly what you say. Because a lot of these people are illegally in the Schengen zone themselves. So what you would hope the French police would do is not, as you say, they have been doing, simply dispersing them, letting them try again, but actually arresting them, which they can do, and holding them themselves, processing themselves. Now, if I was still in the border force, I'd say, well, look, we'll come and help you with that. We don't do that. We can send our own officers, our own casework into that detention centre. We might know them, and we'll help you remove them from France back to wherever they're from or where they came from.
Where is this detention centre?
Well, apparently it fell on planning permission.
Oh, the French have got that as well, have they?
Well, so, you know, now I did ask the Home Office this question yesterday, and they said, well, don't worry, Tony, there's more coming out on this yet.
Oh, right.
So we don't yet know what's happening with the detention. But you're exactly right, Alex. This is the problem that we've always had. Going right back to my day when we set up the juxtaposed controls, I was over there, you know, and we were pulling people out of lorries and pulling people out, you know, with dodgy passports.
But then nowhere to put them.
Well, we give them to the French, and the French would take them away, and they'd be back again the next day. The officers, the team would come back saying, well, he's back. We saw him on Tuesday.
But this is it. This surely works in France's favour as well, because a couple of years ago I was getting the ferry back and I was driving up through France and took a wrong turning. So instead of getting straight to the ferry port, I found myself doing a little bit of the scenic routes, let's say, around Calais. And it's jaw-dropping. When you get towards the ferry ports, Calais is utterly overrun by migrant men, largely everywhere. Everywhere you look, every street corner, it looks like a scene from a sort of, you know, third world apocalypse. There's just sort of raggedy men, all having, so you're being fed dishes of stuff by various NGOs. They're everywhere, hanging at roadsides, trying to climb over fences, you know, in broad daylight, trying to get into lorries. It's and you think, well, why don't people at Calais manage that?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of that, they're not getting into the port of Calais, a lot of those people, because we paid for them fences that you saw. Right. We put additional security all around the ports of Calais, all around the mouth of the tunnel. This was on my watch when we were there, because we thought it's good investment. Because if they're not going to do it, then we're going to kick once they were getting into the port, Berthside. We had our dog teams out Berthside because they'd already gone through and they were coming over into literally where you board. So we put fences up there. Wow. We did a lot, and I think part of that was the reason the boat started in the first place, because we did make it hard, much harder to get through on lorries or with dodgy passports. That was what our whole mission was. But now this is much more difficult because you're dealing with a long stretch of French territory over which they are rightly claiming sovereignty. I would love to have our Border Force officers over there with them, Alex. Yeah. You know, if we could have joint teams, it's been done elsewhere. We did it when I was in America. We did this with Canada and the US, called them integrated border enforcement teams. We had jurisdiction that worked both sides. You could arrest them on your turf, I could arrest them on my turf.
And is it that the French are just completely anti the idea of someone else's boots on the ground, so to speak? Because they allow us, of course, to have our sort of immigration outpost, our little patch of England, their side of the channel for passport control, etc. But beyond that, are they, you know, is it just unconscionable to them that somebody else's law enforcement operates on their soil? Or are they being difficult? Or do you think they might be open to this?
Well, this French government is exactly their position. And what Macron has said is this is actually an EU problem, not a French problem. So he's been kicking them up the road to Brussels. But we've got bilaterals with the French. Alex, I worked on some of the earlier ones. We've got bilateral treaties already. We could have another treaty. It's perfectly feasible. I think you're right. I think the French government are saying, wait a minute, there is a red line here. We are not having your officers working on our sovereign territory. To me, I would like to do that, because then we'd be able to monitor what they're doing, we'd be able to help them in deployments. There's all kinds of stuff we could help them with. What we're doing is we're paying them to do it. But how do we know they're doing all? We only really know when you guys send reporters over there and we can see reports coming in like these ones to see, well, this is what's actually going on the ground. So it will be about monitoring this new deal and making sure we do get that bang for our buck in terms of that additional money. So a lot of the things they're saying to me are helpful, are useful. You know, stopping the taxi boats, building a new vessel out there to stop. We've been asking them to do that for a couple of years now. You know, extra surveillance. You should be able to spot these miles away, these dinghies with surveillance. You know, some of this tech is amazing, Alex. You can see what you've got in your sandwich from satellite. So I mean, it's not hard to. So I'm not sure they're making the best use. Have been making the best use of the assets they've had before. I would really like us to have a monitoring officer or a liaison officer or an exchange officer or something in France to be able to report back to say exactly what's going on, because otherwise we're only getting it through the media channels, really. And
what about Belgium? Because they've popped up again. Now we find that boats are being potentially launched from Belgium, taxiing down the French coast. My understanding was up to this point that the Belgian police had actually been relatively effective and cooperative when it comes to stopping the boats as compared to the French police. But am I just sort of looking on too fondly at the Belgians?
No, your sources are right. I mean, I know reporters that have been over to Belgium and are reporting back to me saying, well, this is what we're seeing. But actually, yes, the Belgians have been more inclined to interdict at sea, more inclined to take people, more behind, but then they haven't got large resources like we've given to the French to do that right across, a stretch of Belgian beaches. So I think, it's indicative that they are moving up to Belgium. The boats have gone down about a third so far this year over last year. So that, I think the Border Security Commander did have an impact in terms of the upstream. All of these little bits have made a difference, I think, but we have got to be aware of the displacement, and then we do need to work with the Belgians as well, I'm afraid. But the best way to control a border is to push the border out and to stop people coming here in the first place if they haven't got the right documents. Now, you can do that at ports of entry, we do that at airports, ports all around the world, but doing that on these beaches, which is sovereign territory elsewhere, particularly on maritime routes, is really, really hard to do. So I'm glad I'm glad we've got a deal. It's an imperfect deal, but at least we're talking to them. I think it's better than nothing, personally.
Well, some progress. Do you know, I had a feeling, Phil, that when it comes to Belgium, I'll tell you what it is. I'm going to play into Belgian stereotypes here. I lived in Belgium for 4 years, so I hoovered up the lot of them. But in Belgium, there's very much this sort of Flemish regard. The French Belgians as being a bit ineffective and lazy, and the Flemish are the ones who roll their sleeves up and get on with it. And of course, all the coastline of Belgium is Flemish Belgium by and large. But also, I think, people don't realise this, but it's a great beach holiday in Belgium, and I don't think they want... Their beach resorts are really fancy.
Yep.
You go to some of them and it's all like nice little beach clubs, cabanas, Prada, Dior shops. Whereas Calais is a bit like forgotten land. It used to be, beaches of Normandy were once celebrated touristically, less so now. And I think that could be a compelling factor. But in terms of what Tony is saying, there does seem to be a modicum of progress with this deal.
Well, as Tony said, talking is important because that's where you then start to get not just the formal deals at government level, but you get a lot of working level understandings. And it's at that working level that no matter what comes in legislation or rules or anything else, you can always find a way of getting a practical solution around it. And that's the critical bit, is keeping both sides at the table and chatting to each other. When you build up those personal relationships, it wouldn't surprise me if the French turn around and say, we have been told that you are not, excuse my very poor French accent, that we are not allowed to talk to you, but here's what is going on.
Here is what is going on.
Yes, and I'll not get into my hello phraseology that's in there because Ofcom might have something to say with it, but that's where the real work gets done.
I want to ask you about something else. We were talking about cyber stuff before because these days a lot of crime is perpetrated online. The same without doubt is true of the people traffickers, the way that they're advertising their wares, coordinating. They're not exactly sending out carrier pigeons to say, would you fancy getting on a boat today at 3 o'clock in the morning? So why does it seem to me that this government aren't really dragging in the big social media channels, dragging in TikTok and all the rest, and saying, look, here are multiple videos of traffickers advertising wares on your platform. This is criminal. What are you going to do about it? I just not. Maybe that has happened. I just missed it if it has.
The government is trying to engage with the different social media users about everything from underage inappropriate material being fired at underage people, suicide material being fired at different people. So the problem on our interconnected platforms is huge, and our law enforcement agencies are dealing with some specific areas. So, very recently there was a separate channel called EncroChat that used its own devices that organised crime gangs were using across Europe to coordinate what was going on, and had been sold as something that couldn't be broken into. French intelligence with the Dutch, I think it was, had managed to get into it and shared what they were getting from the international criminal networks across law enforcement agencies in different countries across Europe. And that has devastated a lot of organised crime. But they moved on to other things because there are so many encrypted channels that you can use. You see the terror organisations using them.
But simply for, the punters, let's say, people who are trying to get on a dinghy in Calais don't necessarily have these, sort of more niche platforms of encrypted communications. I don't understand why we don't say to TikTok, and I don't know what you feel about this, Tony, but, we're seeing again and again people traffickers advertising on your platform. if we see this one more time, we're just going to close you down. You won't operate in Britain.
So the reason they ditch their passports is because they can steal a whole stack of information from them: name, nationality, date of birth, travel history, all that stuff's in the passport. That's why they throw it away. Right, okay, now a lot of this stuff is retrievable from open source intelligence. So I know the Americans, other countries are doing deep dive analysis of social media accounts. That is quite a useful intelligence product, actually.
Oh, right, yeah.
And they're not going to come and tell you that, and I can't really say too much about it. But I think it would be naive to assume that we're not doing anything in the area of social media. So there's one thing about beating the, social media organisation with a big stick. There's another question about exactly what Phil was saying. Well, how are we actually diving into that? How are we penetrating their network of communication to find out data that could be really useful? We might find out what their proper age is and where they've been and what they've been up to. And particularly, the thing that really bothers me is these overseas criminality. So Interpol have only got a certain amount of data. They can only carry data that's already on their database. So if if a country like Ukraine or somewhere, or some Eastern, or Belarus does not upload criminal data onto Interpol, how do we know when they turn up in a boat that they've actually killed someone? We don't, but that might be hidden somewhere in the dark web. It might be. So I'm really interested in the intelligence analytics of social, because this is the future. We won't be having passports in a few years' time. You'll be walking through borders with your face. And you'll miss your face and match it to your record, and that will be that. So that's the way the world is going. And we are at the races on it, Alex, but I agree with you, I would like to see a lot more, but I'm not sure how much of that will be releasable into the media.
Fascinating stuff. Let's do a few messages now. What about the UK hiring a French security company to patrol the beaches and stop the boats? A French company working in French beaches. What could be wrong there? So that's sort of a suggestion from someone about essentially involving the private sector in all of this. I can't imagine the French unions would like that. The French love a good union as well.
Yeah, exactly. And there would still be a legal problem with that, because they're probably just, whatever security company you hire haven't got the jurisdiction to do some of the things the French police could do. How are you going to empower them? And as you say, I don't think that's a runner. I think we need to use the French law enforcement agencies, who are pretty good, actually. I mean, they get a bad press here, but they're not bad at what they do, and they are big, tough blokes.
I know.
I think what we need is an operational order to them, very clearly driven from the top, to say these are the things you can now do. And I think they will. I've been working with them on the ground for many years myself. They don't like human smugglers. They don't like illegal immigrants.
They don't like humans.
No, if you have a chat with them, my French was never that good, but I could at least converse with them, and we talk about all kinds. There's a camaraderie, isn't there? There's a camaraderie in law enforcement across borders that exists, that's still there.
You just have to see the way that the French dealt with Gilets jaunes, but especially dealt with the climate protesters. In Britain, someone super glues their hand to a road, and the police here are like, would you like a cup of tea? Are you comfortable? In France, it's just like, right, I'm pulling you off this tarmac, even if your hand's left behind. They don't care. Someone said, why don't the French allow the UK Army and Navy personnel to patrol their beaches and stop boats from leaving? But I mean, would we want to see French armed forces on our territory?
We don't need the army. I mean, the Border Force are a law enforcement agency, immigration. We've got arrest powers, we've got equipment, we've got tactical. It's a matter of a red line by the French, as we discussed earlier. This is their sovereign strategy. As you say, would we allow French police to come and patrol our beaches? Or French army? No, it can be done by law enforcement. It can be done through a contract or agreement internationally. It can be framed in that way, but that's going to require political agreement between the UK and France, which empowers them to do what needs to be done.
I get the impression politically Macron uses this as a chip in some respects not too dissimilar from some like Erdogan in Turkey, who always says, we've got all of these people who've come to us from the Middle East. We could just let them all into Europe, should we wish. And I do get the impression that Macron does like to use this as a case for pushing more EU. Tony, thank you ever so much. Great to have you here in person. Pleasure. Now, we're going to be talking about an extraordinary case. I was reading it this morning in the car coming over here, and I feel quite affected by it, actually, of a woman who has decided to go to Switzerland and take her own life. And it's astonishing, really, because she was in good health. She was young. She had no mental health issues, but she did have tragedy in her life. Is this right? Should we be allowing people to take their own lives? We're going to be speaking to Tim Dieppe, who's Head of Public Policy at Christian Concern, after this.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. We're just discussing accents you are and are not allowed to do on air. We're not going to test it out. We're not going to quiz Ofcom in real time about this. Don't you worry. Would be fun though, wouldn't it? Why not? Yeah. In fact, bring back humour. That's what I just think we've got to a stage now. We know what is offensive, and it comes down to intent, doesn't it? Are you meaning to upset someone? Are you doing something out of malice? Or are you doing it because it is an accident or because it's funny? I just wish we could all get back to the days where humour wasn't outlawed. Now, let's talk about a big debate that's been swilling around in the UK for the past couple of years, really, ever since Labour came into power and decided they wanted to push for assisted dying. Well, it has yet to come to pass in the United Kingdom, but there are still various clinics in Switzerland who don't necessarily allow suicide, but it doesn't legislate against somebody who is or helping somebody take their own life. Now, this is the incredibly sad story of Wendy Duffy, who is 56 years old, and she decided to end her life at a Swiss clinic this week. This was a big feature in the Daily Mail. She said, I want to die and that's what I'm going to do. My life, my choice. And she wanted to share her story because she wants to draw attention to the unfairness of the current system on her family. She tried to take her own life already and failed and informed her family of her decision. She has 4 sisters and 2 brothers. But she's not informed them of the timescale of when she's flying to Switzerland and when she's going to do X, Y and Z, because they know that if anyone knew or travelled with her, then they could face police investigation, if not prosecution. Now, she went to a clinic called Pegasus, which seemingly is a little bit more lenient than the very well-known Dignitas. And the tragic circumstance that led her to wanting to take her own life when she is not mentally compromised and very healthy was the death of her only child. Which is an extremely sad story. She had a son. She didn't think she could have children. She had a son. It was just her and her son Marcus after she separated from her husband. And her boy one day had a sandwich that she herself had prepared. He was hungover and seemingly fell asleep on the sofa halfway through eating the sandwich, and she came down to find him not being able to breathe and tried to resuscitate him and was unable to do so. So I think we can all agree that that's an extremely horrific tragedy for anybody to live with for the rest of their life. But it does actually point in the direction of the sort of travel that assisted dying seems to take when it is allowed in countries. There have been multiple cases of people taking their life on the grounds of depression or mental health crises in countries such as Canada and indeed the Netherlands. Well, let's speak now to Tim Dieppe, Head of Public Policy at Christian Concern. Now, Tim, a lot of people would say, well, the problem is that we're not having this assisted dying in the UK. We treat people who are suffering from chronic diseases, so on and so forth, worse than we would our pets because of people like blimmin' Christians who let religion get in the way of decisions that are otherwise compassionate. A little sort of disclaimer here. I myself am a Christian and therefore I am also against assisted dying, but I can see the logic for people who say, well, look, they're in chronic pain, they're really suffering. Why shouldn't we give them the ability, if they know they're going to be passing away at some point soon, dignity, as Pia's campaigners say, dignity in choosing that moment and comfort?
Great questions, Alex. Thank you for that. I think, obviously, I have great compassion on Wendy Duffy. What a horrific story. What a tragedy, really, that she's come to this point where she feels like the only option is to end her life. And the point, really, when I read that story and hear it, is to say, surely anybody with compassion will want to say to her, no, don't do it. You know, if you come across someone on a bridge who's wanting to
considering jumping off, you say, please don't do it. No, and you try and persuade them not to. And anybody who loves her now and cares for her should be saying that to her. That's what any compassionate, caring society does. It says, no, don't choose suicide. Let's choose care. Let's choose some way. Let's come and find you some therapy. Let's come and find some way of supporting you and helping you and being friends with you and finding a way through this mental pain, mental anguish that she has from this awful tragedy in her family. And that's really what any society should do about anybody who considers suicide, really. I've seen my wife died a few years back, and I've seen how that all happened, and we had excellent palliative care, I'm pleased to say, in that case. And obviously it's a tragedy when anyone dies, but, and I've seen my mother die as well and things, and so, I've seen what death is like, and actually it's not, a what's the word, a kind of traumatic situation. It's what happens at the end of life if you get good palliative care. And that's really what society should invest in, is good palliative care for everyone, is what everyone should be able to have and should be able to look after, and should not fear like a terrible, awful situation of death, because actually it can be very peaceful and sort of, something that you come to accept and then you move on from in the rest of your life. And that's how it should be. And obviously she's seen a very traumatic situation with her son, this lady, and that's awful, and that sometimes accidents like that will happen and so on. But that's not to blame anyone for that. But she needs support and health. She doesn't need, let's offer you suicide then.
But this is always going to be the difficulty because people always find a case study where you look at it and you think, well, I can fully understand why that particular person warrants our sympathy, particularly when it comes to, let's say, physical medical conditions, people who might be suffering terribly from something like MS, to which there is no cure. And it gets to the stage that actually enabling people to live in comfort becomes incredibly difficult. No medicines on earth can mobilise them, make them be able to get out of bed. They suffer from bed sores, all of these things, recurrent infections, and in a great amount of pain. And yet my understanding is in this country, at the time when the Assisted Dying Act was introduced, that we started debating this, that about 1/3 of hospices money comes from the government, and the rest it requires charity shops and things like that. And you think, but this is the very basics. If we are, as a society, are not providing a good level of palliative care, this isn't the time, surely, to come and start introducing ways in which you can die quickly. But when it comes to mental health, this is where I think there's so many dark areas, because how can somebody assess the fitness of somebody's decision? Because one would say, well, look, when you look at mitigating factors in a court, it might be, well, I've been going through tragedy, I've been suffering from depression, and this is why I got behind the wheel of my car drunk that day. Or we've heard it so often with people who've gone on sort of rampages with a knife. Well, they've got mental health issues. So how do we then how can anyone sort of square the circle of saying mental health issues could be reason for somebody ending their life, but then also saying they've got the mental capacity to make that decision?
It's an excellent contradiction that you point out there. Yes, and actually proponents of assisted suicide have tended to shy away from engaging this point about mental health. Like, really you should be protecting people who have mental health issues from being persuaded or coerced or whatever, or feel under pressure to end their lives, which only adds to their mental stress and mental strain. Surely, you should be actually, saying, no, if anybody's got mental issues, they should be disqualified from having assisted suicide because they're already struggling to get their mental act together in these kind of ways. And that's a safeguard that should be there for any of these kind of laws, which I really hope don't come in. Yes, and we need to have mental help for people and mental charities and so on, and mental support for people who are suffering in these kind of ways, whether it's grief or whether it's some other kind of mental distress or disorder that people have, and they need full support. And you don't want to say, what you really don't want to get to is a culture where it says suicide is an option for people, and suicide is an option if you've got particular kind of pain, whether it's mental or physical. I read a story a little while ago of a chap who was in the Netherlands in hospital for some condition and had bed sores, and the doctors would come round every morning on their morning round and say, he would say, I've got this pain from these bed sores, and they would say, yeah, I'm not sure there's much we can do about that, but we can offer you suicide.
Oh, shocking. Tim, I can't even. This is the problem. You introduce something like this into legislation, and quick enough you get a spiralling out of control and abuses and tragic cases. Be very careful what you introduce, because it always grows by stealth. Right, we're taking a short break now, but don't go anywhere, because we've still got 1 more hour of news and views to come. I'll see you in just a moment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'd like to provide the House with information that I now have about the appointment of Peter Mandelson as our ambassador to the United States. But, Mr. Speaker, before I go into the details, I want to be very clear with this House that while this statement will focus on the process surrounding Peter Mandelson's vetting and appointment, at the heart of this, there is also a judgment I made that was wrong.
The name had been submitted to the King as Minister's recommendation. The Prime Minister had made an announcement that Mandelson was his nominee without caveats. The British government had sought agrément, the formal diplomatic process for a host government accepting a nominee from the US government, and that had been obtained before I arrived in post. The position taken from the Cabinet Office was that there was no need to vet Mandelson.
Mr. Speaker, I know many members across the House will find these facts to be incredible. To that, I can only say they are right. It beggars belief that throughout the whole timeline of events, officials in the Foreign Office saw fit to withhold this information from the most senior ministers in our system in government.
This was not due process. Everyone knows the price of misleading the House. Will the Prime Minister finally take responsibility and go?
Mr. Speaker, let's be absolutely clear. Before Mandelson took up his post, UKSV recommended with red flags that clearance should be denied, and there was high concern that that was not brought to my attention or the attention of the Foreign...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. We're going to pick up the conversation about assisted dying a bit later, because Philip and I have just been nattering about it, and he's got some brilliant points to make. But before we do that, let's welcome Andrew Allison, Head of Campaigns at Popular Conservatism, to HMS Common Sense here at Talk Towers. Good morning, good afternoon, actually, to you, Andrew.
Yeah, very good afternoon. Happy St. George's Day.
Happy St. George's Day. Now, let us, first of all, talk about Starmer. It seems to me that, well, you know, it's all beginning to fall away from him now. I wonder if the civil service like him or can trust him. I wonder whether his cabinet like him or can trust him. The suggestion is that various people around the cabinet are sort of saying, it's gone too far now. You know, we've grit our teeth. We've had to sort of, you know, put up with this and bang the drum and adhere to the party line. But what we're now being faced with is just putting us in an impossible situation. And so you wonder how long he might be able to hang on.
Well, that's the $64,000 question. How long is he likely to hang on? The herd certainly seems to be moving. I think they're taking baby steps at the moment in the cabinet. When you looked at Ed Miliband, he was on Good Morning Britain a couple of days ago, and he was being quizzed about the appointment of Peter Mandelson. Eventually, Ed just sort of gave up and said, I wouldn't have appointed him. And that was him sort of giving up on his defence of Keir Starmer at that point. Pat McFadden, the enforcer in the cabinet, Keir Starmer's most trusted ally in many ways, he has not mounted as robust a defence of Keir Starmer as perhaps he has done in the past. And then, of course, you've got the Labour MP for Hartlepool, who's openly come out and has said that Keir Starmer should resign. Now, we know from Boris Johnson's demise that when the end comes, it comes extremely quickly. When we started that week, that Monday morning, we didn't expect that Boris Johnson would be resigning by the end of the week. But the whole Chris Pincher affair blew up in his face. He didn't handle it particularly well. You've got cabinet ministers resigning, then you've got other ministers resigning, and then what started as a trickle turned into a torrent, and Boris Johnson was out very quickly. And that's what can happen. Now, I think what we do know is that Keir Starmer will not be gone by the local elections, which are in 2 weeks' time. And when his replacement is eventually found, it always takes Labour a long time, probably a couple of months, to actually come up with a replacement. So even if he resigns, we still probably, God help us all, have another 2 months of Keir Starmer. But when it happens, it will happen quickly. And I think it will happen later this year. I certainly don't think Keir Starmer will be Prime Minister by the end of the year.
Let's talk about the factions in the Labour Party and who runs who and why certain decisions are being taken, because I think there's a lot more to this story than meets the eye. And I've said this repeatedly until I'm blue in the face. The connections with foreign regimes, I think, are well worth digging around. And I think that this is written most clearly, let's say, in the direct appointments. But if we're talking about Peter Mandelson and political appointments, and Mandelson potentially failing his vetting, not so much based on his contact with Jeffrey Epstein, but based upon some of his clients via his global public affairs lobbying firm, then I think it's worthwhile looking at the political appointment of Lord Richard Hermer, who was given a peerage, made into a lord, simply so that the Prime Minister could appoint his chum to become Attorney General, a man who's not elected, a man who I assume has not faced any sort of vetting, because the who's who of his former client list as a barrister doesn't make for very comfortable reading. And especially, I mean, now the Telegraph are focusing on the witch hunt against our armed forces. And when you look at the detail of this, 25,000 pages showing that over a course of nearly 10 years, he was involved on a no-win, no-fee basis of trying to bring prosecutions against our armed forces historically in Iraq from people who, it turned out, basically were terrorists acting at the behest of the IRGC. And then this person ends up becoming the highest legal position in the land. I'm astonished, frankly, when all of this stuff was publicly available, that nobody's made this point in the last 2 years. How has this man been allowed to be Attorney General, making some of the decisions he has made, presiding over issues of extreme importance of national security, and no one's ever said, funny, the whole Chagos thing. Funny, not prescribing the IRGC. Because based on some of the people that you've worked for in the past, perhaps there's something to see here. Now, I'm not alleging that there is. He would argue that everybody deserves a defence and that he's never done anything other than follow the highest standards of practice, etc. But it certainly, on the surface, looks like the sort of thing that would make a security vetting raise an eyebrow.
He's Attorney General because, like all ministers of the Crown, he's appointed by the Prime Minister. All those appointments are within the gift of the Prime Minister. And as you quite rightly said, Lord Hermer is a chum of Keir Starmer. Well, a little bit more than that, really, Alex. He's one of his best friends. And also, just like him, a human rights lawyer, and they pretty much think alike. That's why he was created a peer and was appointed to the role that he's in now. He doesn't have to be vetted because ministers do not have to be vetted for security, and it's as simple as that. As to the question of his suitability, well, I think he is completely unsuitable. You've mentioned all the stuff to do with our soldiers. But there's also things to do with Jerry Adams. In 2023, he defended Jerry Adams against the government. He is very close to the Chagos deal. He's really driving through the Chagos deal. So you have to ask, why did Keir Starmer want him as Attorney General? Why did he go to these lengths, and why is he sticking by him? Well, the answer is very simple. Him and Lord Hermer think alike, pretty much identically. So the sort of legal advice that Keir Starmer wants to get from his Attorney General is going to be the advice that he really, really wants. And Lord Hermer is always going to give him that advice. So no matter what scandal that Lord Hermer is involved in, Keir Starmer is going to stand by him. And of course, as soon as Starmer goes, Lord Hermer will go as well. But because he's been created a peer, he's in the House of Lords for the rest of his life.
Well, I mean, this is the thing. I've often wondered who the senior party is in this relationship in terms of, you know, you made the point of why did Starmer so want Hermer? And normally the job of the Attorney General is that the government of the day says, right, we want to stop the boats crossing the channel. Legally, how do we do this? And the Attorney General looks at it and looks at that government's position, says this is how. And it's been suggested to me, actually, that the relationship with Richard Hermer is slightly different, that he actually turns around and says to Starmer, because of X, Y and Z in the law, you can't do this, rather than, and take, for instance, when Hermer suddenly said, because it seemed to me, and I'm not precise on the chronology, so bear with me if I have been inaccurate on this, but it seemed to me at one point Starmer said to the public, we are going to intercept the shadow fleet, Russia's vessels that are sanctioned, that shouldn't be selling its wares, you know, fossil fuels on the high seas to rogue states and funding Putin's war machine. And Starmer appeared to have said, we're going to stop this shadow fleet wherever we shall find them. Now, the reason that we didn't do that, and the reason why a big blimmin' sanctioned tanker went through the English Channel, audaciously escorted by a Russian warship with our own vessel chugging along behind, was it seems Hermer then gave the instruction that, well, you can't board those ships because it'd be against some sort of international law. And so this is where I then look at the idea of who is the senior figure in this relationship, and perhaps... Because Starmer himself wasn't in politics for very long. I can't remember when he got elected, but he hasn't been there for decades.
2005.
2005, there you go. Very quickly he was made into a shadow minister and sort of touted to be the next Labour leader. And if you look back historically at the Labour Party, it seems to be the sort of party has within its core, at its kernel, a sort of little network of human rights lawyers going all the way back to the Matrix Chambers, the Doughty Chambers, Cherie Blair, etc. There for a long time has been this sort of human rights globalist network at the heart of the party. And I wonder, actually, rather than Hermer being Starmer's pick, whether Starmer is the pick of that particular network.
That could well be true. I think the one thing we do know about Keir Starmer, Alex, is that he's not a man who has particularly strong views, strong principles. He doesn't have an ideology. I have a feeling that when he went into Downing Street, he thought he could rule by simply following the rules, the different regulations, the processes, the procedures, and as long as he did all of that, everything would be okay. We know that Morgan McSweeney was largely responsible for getting him elected leader, and then he eventually became chief of staff to Keir Starmer. And I don't have much doubt that it was Morgan McSweeney who was calling the shots inside Downing Street. And we've had the whole thing about what Starmer knew and what he didn't know about the appointment of Peter Mandelson. But certainly Lord Hermer has an agenda. And I think we know that, don't we? We can see his agenda with Chagos. We can see some of the clients that he's represented that we've discussed earlier.
I think we can certainly Starmer, sort of make that assumption. Whether he has an agenda, I don't know. But looking at the patterns, you know, the trends evident through the clients he's taken on board, it does seem to have a peculiar number of people who want to attack the UK state.
Well, yes. I mean, it's only my hypothesis on this. I'm not saying that it's true. It's just simply my opinion. But I think that he does seem to have some sort of agenda. And Starmer and him are working in lockstep. Now, who's the senior partner in all of this? Well, it could be Richard Hermer. Who knows? But because we've got a prime minister who doesn't have particularly strong opinions, a strong ideology, he's going to be easily led all over the place.
Now, Phil, I'm going to bring you into this because it's a very interesting question. I don't know if the UK has really had to answer this as much as it's having to today, or at least it's not today, but I think it needs to be asked, which is in a democracy, you have the freedom to elect whoever you want. And I treasure freedom and I treasure democracy. But it seems to me we spent half of the last century fighting communism, to the tune of trillions and trillions of pounds and dollars with the Americans, being extremely sceptical about networks connected to hostile states during the Cold War. Then we spent most of the end of the last century, beginning of this century, fighting Islamism and Islamic terrorism. Now we seem to have both sitting on the green benches. And one has to ask, and you know, I think the appointment of Hermer, to me, strikes a massive warning sound that this man has access to all sorts of information, is an extremely powerful player, has been directly appointed, isn't, one assumes, security vetted, doesn't need to be, and is at the heart of our government. And do we have to start asking uncomfortable questions, including when you look at some of these pro-Gaza MPs and what their connections are, where their loyalties are? Similarly, when you look at the sort of Corbynista, very left-wing part of the Labour Party, have they been in... Mandelson himself, someone told me, was a member of the actual Communist Party for a long period of time. Our own Prime Minister did his gap year in a Soviet workers' camp, for crying out loud. I mean, I didn't imagine at any point our system would be such that we essentially have a former communist as our Prime Minister and Islamists sitting on the green benches. And that seems to be where we're at.
Yeah, well, it's not the issue of sitting on the green benches, because I think we should separate this. It's the fact that we've got someone who's been appointed to the green benches to be at the heart of government. Because you can sit in the green benches, you can have any political view you want, and that'll add value to the debates that are going on inside there. It doesn't mean that you're at the centre of government. But if you're in an unelected position at the centre of government, especially, you know, as Andrew's been saying with regard to Keir Starmer, who's got no real ideology, well, if your and he just wants to follow the rules, if the rules are made up by your team or interpreted by your team, like Lord Hermer, then you're going to follow whatever Lord Hermer is turning around and saying. And if you've got Morgan McSweeney, who is also feeding you what rules need to be put in there because you're following what it is, because he's your chief of staff, he's dealing with it. And therefore what we've got here are two very powerful unelected individuals influencing directly what our elected official is doing and his output and the way he's leading things. This is anti-democratic because it is not following what the electorate wants. It's following what is ever on the agenda of Hermer and McSweeney and anyone else who's unelected
and then going a bit further to that, people who, unlike the civil service, aren't necessarily vetted, especially when they're a direct appointment, like Lord Hermer.
Yeah, and they don't follow the civil service code, so they're not being neutral in what they're doing. They're being completely political because they're political appointees. That comes in. This is where there is a flaw in the way our government works, and we should not allow individuals who are either not in the civil service, because the civil service have got a code of practice that they have to go to, or who are not elected and can be held to account by the electorate to hold these significant positions.
I mean, what do you think should happen now? It's all very well the Telegraph running a front page, and I give them a, you know, doff of the cap for doing so, because I have said for years, why on earth is this man in the job he's in, and why aren't people asking more questions? He's freaked me out for a long time. So I'm pleased to see, finally, someone somewhere in the legacy media asking questions. But what's going to become of it? Because I can't see, you know, the legacy broadcast channels talking about this. I'm not seeing an emergency debate in Parliament being called to cross-examine Richard Hermer. That man never even turns up to address the Parliament. He's completely unaccountable. So,
well,
you know, should Kemi Badenoch perhaps start reading the Telegraph, looking at this and going, this is the next chew toy I'm going to go after?
Well, he's in the House of Lords, so therefore he has to answer questions in Parliament. So there is some scrutiny of him, but of course he is unelected because he's in the House of Lords. What will happen to him? He will remain in post for as long as Starmer is in post. If all the stuff that has been revealed about him since he was appointed in July 2024 hasn't brought him down, I can't see what else is going to bring him down. So he's there until as long as Starmer is there.
Andrew, thank you ever so much. And like I said, I'd love to see, well, either whoever wants to go after Lord Hermer, get on with it. This is 2 years too late. You need to be taking this seriously. I've said it till I'm blue in the face. One day someone's going to listen. We need to read out what the spokesman for the Attorney General has said. Lord Hermer did a small amount of work. So this is about the Al-Sweady case in particular, which is the attempted prosecution of British soldiers serving in Iraq on the grounds of apparently committing crimes against locals. Lord Hermer did a small amount of work at the start of this case where he made clear that serious allegations at the time needed further investigation. The attorney argued it would be unfair on armed services personnel if they didn't have the opportunity to show their innocence through a proper investigation. The Attorney General had minimum involvement in the Al-Sweady claims limited to a small number of hours between 2008 and 2013, as soon as the Solicitors Regulation Authority case was brought forward. So this is regarding the behaviour of a man called Phil Shiner, who was prosecuted for fraud in relation to this case as well. And therefore worked with Lord Hermer on this case. The Attorney General was clear in his condemnation for the reprehensible behaviour of Mr Shiner that's rightfully led him to being disqualified and successfully prosecuted. I mean, Phil, I don't understand why this has not been picked up and investigated fully before.
Neither do I, and it needs to be investigated even more. You know, I'm sitting looking at an email that Zia Youssef has put out on social media, and it says it's come from Richard Hermer to Martin Day, one of the solicitors that are in there, and they're talking about Phil Shiner. It was allegedly sent out on February 17th, 2008. He said, I think the line to Phil Shiner, he means, works in getting the balance between making sure that the big story is out there whilst giving us some wiggle room if the killings did not in fact happen. Right. Do you need to be slightly more explicit in the press release about evidence raising serious concerns of executions of prisoners in order to generate sufficient interest, or will the Today interview naturally bring you the punters later in the morning?
It's so
That's
cynical.
Disgusting.
It's dark. It's basically saying we want to get out there that US armed forces are murderers and monsters.
No, British.
Yeah, sorry, UK armed forces. Yeah, that's sorry. Did I say US? That they're monsters and murderers, and we've seen this. You know, Panorama went Tonto on this story.
And not caring about the impact on the individual. Not caring about the impact on the individual who's put a life on it. It's disgusting. This is bigger than the Mandelson case and needs to be highlighted. You know, Richard Hermer has to go. You know, he's lost any moral rationale for remaining in post as our Attorney General. He will have lost the total support of all of our armed forces, and I don't understand why those in the cabinet who are former members of the military can turn around and turn up to cabinet meetings with them being there. You know, and I'm talking of Al Cairns, Louise Sanders-Jones, and the likes. They're just two that are sitting in the Ministry of Defence.
It beggars belief. It really does. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to message me or talk to me about this, you can. 0344 499 1000 is the number to dial. It's your normal network rate. You can also use that number to send me a WhatsApp message. 8722 is the number to send a text message. Write the word talk before you text. We're going to take a short break. We're going to be speaking to you guys just after this.
I hope I wouldn't have used that. Well, certainly I don't remember trying to get any job for my mates.
Can you get a job? Can you help get a job for ex's mates? But don't tell the Foreign Secretary.
I don't think it's completely surprising that the Prime Minister would be so sensitive about the way in which he was dealing with a member of his senior team, and particularly a Director of Communications who's in minute-by-minute contact with the media, that he would want that kept to a very, very tight group of people at the time.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Oh, here we go. Let's remind ourselves of Sir Keir Starmer's lovely, mellifluous, patriotic words on today, our wonderful St George's Day. Yeah, that's right, he slammed plastic patriotism, saying the nation should celebrate service, generosity and respect. The Prime Minister warned against voices both here and abroad seeking to divide the country as he welcomed members of the public and celebrities to Downing Street for a reception to mark England's patron saint. He also gave 3 examples of people at the Number 10 gathering who he decided embodied the values he thought of as English. This included Isaac Davidson, a window cleaner who helped to remove racist graffiti from a Chinese restaurant in York last year; George Sutherland, a volunteer at a food bank in Telford, who'd previously mentioned during his Labour Party conference speech; and Ben Huntley, a nurse who looked after his brother Nick Starmer before his death from cancer on Boxing Day. OK, nice examples, but why do you have to use it as an opportunity to suggest other people who aren't you, who aren't on the left, if they're patriots and nationalists, then somehow they're phonies? Would you turn around on St Patrick's Day and go, well, you know, St Patrick's Day, a lot of fun, have some Guinness, but don't get sectarian now. Don't forget that, you know, you can't go blowing things up like the Irish. I mean, you wouldn't do it. It would be considered of great insult if you hijacked anybody else's patron saint day to try and make a political point to bash over the head the natives, who otherwise feel like they've never been allowed to celebrate it for fear of being called a racist. Then you turn around and you say, oh, they're plastic patriots. Get on with you, lad. Seriously, what is wrong with the man? Right, you ready for some calls, Phil?
Oh, definitely, yes.
OK.
Crack on.
Let's start off with, we've got one of our regulars, Chris in Epsom. Hi, Chris.
Good morning, or good afternoon now, Alex and Philip, and a happy St George's Day.
Right, thank you.
Happy St George's Day to you, Chris.
And obviously, famously, we know that St George is known for slaying the dragon. Mm-hmm. And there's only one dragon that needs slaying today, and its name is Hermer. The man is, as Philip put it, he's lost the support of all the armed forces. He's lost the support. I think he's lost the support of every proud Englishman. I mean, this man knew evidence to be false and asked if we could find some wiggle room if it proved that they couldn't prove the facts. I mean, what is going on?
I mean, it's not just that, is it? I mean, this is the thing, Phil. It isn't just the witch hunt against the armed forces is egregious enough. It is utterly monstrous and vile and disgusting. But the worst part of it is that's not where it begins and ends with Hermer.
No, it's not. And to put soldiers, decorated soldiers, under such pressure where it virtually destroys their family, it destroys their life. For these legal proceedings go on for years, and whilst that's hanging over someone's head, they cannot get on with normal life, and in many cases it leads to PTSD and or mental health conditions being enhanced and all the rest of it. It's shocking, and then it's all dropped at the end of the day, and nothing happens, and there's no apology, there's no compensation for all of that time where someone hasn't been able to get on with their life, for the impact that it's had on a family or anything else. There's just no, it's all dropped. You're free to go. You're innocent now, and just get on with life.
But there's also, we were talking earlier, that staggering thing that you were reading out about, and I'd read that before about, in fact, I think it's in the Telegraph copy, about the sort of enthusiasm of Hermer to get a press conference out, speculating, vilifying members of the armed forces without any evidence that these accusations were true. But also there are questions to be asked of the BBC frankly, who are also seemingly so excited, salivating at the prospect of being able to broadcast this stuff. There's a real sort of malign perversion at the heart of the establishment that seems to delight in watching England brought to its knees, humiliated, scuppered, demonised.
Yeah, and it's more than England; it's the whole of the United Kingdom that they're trying to bring to their knees. And of course, a lot of what we're seeing out is creating division across the United Kingdom in many of the policies that are there, and this is where we examine this more and more and more. The more you drill into it, the more you look at everything that's going on, the more we should be really, really worried. But I get back down to the impact that this has on individuals. He doesn't care. That email that I read out, he turned around and said, is this going to generate the punters? It's all about generating business for him and his mates. And that comes to the heart of, from my personal opinion, a lot of what's going on, a lot of the decisions that we're making. It must be being influenced for some other reason other than just a political belief. But his political belief is not one that's been he's been put there on the say-so of the country by being elected. He hasn't. He's Keir Starmer's mate. Keir Starmer elevated him to the House of Lords because he was his mate and appointed him into a position where he can interpret everything that Keir Starmer does because he's his mate. He's unaccountable, and the House of Lords won't hold him to account.
Well, this is the thing. You don't get to pick your family, but you do get to choose your friends. And right. I certainly don't have anybody in my friendship circle who would take such sort of Schadenfreudian delight in prosecuting men and women in our armed forces on shaky grounds. And yet, that sort of language, let's get the message out, press conference, bring the punters, we need some wriggle room there if it's not true.
To Phil Shiner, who's been found guilty of his fraudulent activities and struck off and everything else.
There's a sickness to it. There's a perversion. There's a delight being taken in the idea of, come on, let's get them. Let's get them, boys, against our armed forces. And, like I said, there's... Again, wanting to hand over sovereign territory. Well, Britain needs to suffer. Got to pay some reparations. Chagos has to go because this is about colonialism. If these are the people that Starmer calls his Bezos, what does it say about our Prime Minister?
Yeah, but all of this shows his underpinning beliefs. And therefore the foundation on which he builds everything on. So, handing over the Chagos, who are the winners that are going to come out of that? Primarily China. In looking at it, the UK-US relationship is going to lose hugely. Who are the winners coming out of the interpretation of it would be illegal to intercept Putin's grey fleet, the tankers? Well, it's Vladimir Putin and his oligarchs and his criminal gangs that underpin that. Who are the winners when it comes to the legacy bill in Northern Ireland and you're representing Jerry Adams and other senior figures against the British government? It's the terrorist organisation that have been fighting. These all happened before he got elevated to the House of Lords. Those are indicators of his underlying foundational beliefs.
Yeah, it's really grim. But this is it. Who are then the winners from not prescribing the IRGC? Who are then the winners of enabling China to have a big mega embassy, despite the security services going, maybe not a good idea? Who's the winners when it comes to having a case where we were supposed to be sending 2 men to prison, potentially, for spying on behalf of China? Then the government decided we're not going to provide the statement saying China's risk to national security. Every single time, the winners in these decisions are hostile states.
Correct.
And that is terrifying. That chills me to the bone. Let's speak now to another Chris. This Chris is a West Midlands Chris. Hello, Chris.
Hi there. Good afternoon, Alex, and good afternoon to Philip.
Good afternoon, Chris.
This is George's Day. I would like to start off with, because Philip, you've just said part of what I was going to say about the cronyism, which Starmer said he was going to stop. And he's done nothing but a load of cronyism.
Yeah, his whole government's built on cronyism.
Yeah. However, with this particular post, everybody knows exactly what it's like. It is at the top of the tree. Yeah?
Yeah.
And you need somebody at the top of the tree. Now, in my personal opinion, I think Philip Ingram, who you got there, is ideal for the post, and I'll tell you why.
What, as Attorney General?
Pardon?
As Attorney General?
No, for the post of, for being the ambassador of America.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, okay, good, right, on it.
I'll tell you why. Because Phil has got all the experience of things like the Five Eyes, other departments that we do not know about, and certainly knows about the military and the capabilities. with the world as it is now, the way things have been going, he would have been the perfect person in that White House.
Well, there we go. Do you know, I couldn't agree more, but would it be cronyism if I said so? Chris, thank you ever so much. There you go. You're the new sort of
Chris,
shadow.
thank you for your faith in me, but no, I think we need better people than me who could be His Majesty's ambassador to the United States.
But it is an interesting thing, actually, and very briefly, let's talk about this, about whether or not institutions such as Five Eyes, the intelligence sharing between the Anglosphere, still continues rumbling on, even if, let's say, the Americans say to each other, that British government ain't to be trusted. There is there are other layers, aren't there, where they're still cooperating, even if we've got a bit of a wrong in number 10.
Let me explain the special relationship, because that's at the bottom of it. The special relationship is a working relationship at working level between the different intelligence agencies. It started during the First World War, whenever we intercepted the Zimmerman telegram, which was given to the Americans, where the Germans were trying to stimulate the Mexicans to attack into America, and the Germans said, we'll support you in that. That brought the Americans into the First World War. In the Second World War, then, we allowed the Americans to gain access to the Enigma system, and then we helped the Americans set up their own intelligence agencies that there are at the moment, and their special forces. So that's the working level special relationship, and there is a physical element to it around the world, as well as this working relationship level that can't be replicated by any one particular nation. So that will remain strong. There's always been restrictions depending on the politics as to what you will share. You don't share 100% of everything. What you'll share and what you won't share, and that politics bit goes on above it. And commentators take that intelligence special relationship, which is where it properly started, and try and inflate it to being a political special relationship. That waxes and wanes depending on who's in post. Everything else goes on at that working level. In the same way that we were talking about border force and everything else, it's built on personalities, and it's built on trust that's been there since for many years.
Fascinating stuff. Let's speak now to John, who's in the wonderful Castle Point in Essex. Hi, John.
Hi. Oh, that's fascinating to listen to your conversation with the last caller. There's one area in this thread that leads through this labyrinth of what's going on, and that's the old communist idea or globalist idea. To make an omelette, you need to smash eggs. Deliberately trying to destroy the country. And I think that goes back to, I'm one of your retired doctors, nearly 95 in a few weeks' time. And I'll call about what I was going to say. Interesting to hear that you're a Christian, because there's a wonderful monument, not raised up, but what went on long ago in Benfleet. That was the Battle of Benfleet. There's a stone in the church wall, AD 893. Alfred the Great sent his son to storm the camp here, where the Danes had stashed all their loot. With their loot were their wives and children. And he did the unheard of thing. Instead of turning them into slaves, he gave them all back.
Wow.
After defeating the Danes himself, people said you couldn't keep them out, which was right, but Alfred said, no, we can't keep them out, we'll keep them in. And he had a force ready at the Lee Valley, so there were about 100 ships up the Lee Valley where the main force was, and he kept them in and defeated them there. Of course, what was happening is there's 60 men to a boat. If it turned up at a little Cornish fishing village with 3 able-bodied men, what could they do against 60 fit young men who just rowed across Norway to England?
It's almost like some chapters of history all too often repeat themselves as well. We're a little island. If we're not fighting the Vikings, someone else will be trying to get to us from across the seas.
It's the French.
The French, yeah, exactly. Well, the Spanish, we dealt with both, didn't we, once upon a time? John, thank you ever so much for your call. Right, we're going to take a short break. And then a very interesting story has popped up today about the Green policy, who, seemingly because the Daily Mail constantly points out how mental a lot of their policy is, they're going to have a little purge of some of their more mad policies, so they say. I wonder what will be on the keep list and what will be on the bin list. We'll be discussing that after the break.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
The Greens. Balmy? No, nothing to see here. Just an ordinary bunch of lovely people who want to save the planet and look after the vulnerable. I don't know why you'd be scared of them at all. They're polling so high for a reason, because they're just cuddly and nice and everyone can see sense in everything that they say. Or can they? Because Daily Mail, to their credits, have had a bit of a campaign about trying to stop the Green Party from getting away with it. Basically pointing out all of their, well, let's say spicier policies, and suggesting that if these people ever get near power, what a dangerous day that will be for the United Kingdom. Because it's true, isn't it? The legacy channels just seem to think Zach Polanski's a little bit of fun. Oh, well, you know, the Green Party, young people who go to Glastonbury love them. Where's the harm in that? People go out of these funny little fads anyway. Well, it's just a bunch of cute hippies, bless them. Let's platform them and never ask them about some of the more crazy stuff in the manifesto. Well, apparently, Zach Polanski's Green Party is now set to launch a purge on its mad policies. Let's look at some of them. Abolish the monarchy. Well, there might be some, I don't agree with it, but you can see leftist viewpoints, I suppose. Give illegal migrants a free house and a wage with no work requirements. Yeah, that's right. Just anyone who comes into the country, we have to pay to have a house and they don't need to work. Anyone, because fully open borders, slashing the speed limit to 55 miles per hour, slashing the size of the armed forces. What a great idea just at the moment that we're in geopolitical chaos. So one Green official moaned to the Politico news website, right now, it's like we've got a list of policies for the Daily Mail to ring us up about. One Green official moaned to that particular website. Well, I mean, they are crazy. This is the thing about the Green Party. When you look at some of the things, like fully legalising drugs, fully legalising prostitution, having open borders, this isn't liberal. To me, this is carte blanche to people traffickers, to sex traffic women with impunity. And children. And drugs. To drug these women to... I mean,
they should be called the Anarchy Party, not the Green Party.
It is the most damaging, dangerous... I mean, when it comes to... you know, motorway speed limit to 55 miles per hour, that is on their list to bin. Well, good. It's just a ridiculous policy. It's not going to necessarily help anything. Similarly, slashing the size of the armed forces, clearly a very dangerous policy. But a lot of their other stuff, apparently the drugs legalisation is a Zach Polanski pet project. It will be a disaster if that ever happened.
Yeah, it will. But we've got a party that has had one MP beforehand. They can make whatever stuff up they want and put it out there to appeal to the half a dozen people that have stood in front of them and say, yeah, for you I'll give you this, for you I'll give you that, for you I'll give you that, and please everyone that's in the room with some crazy idea. And then they start publishing these crazy ideas and talking about them a bit more publicly, because all of a sudden they're getting a little bit more visibility as the Labour Party voters are saying we need an alternative. We're not going to vote for reform. We're not going to vote for the Tories. We're not going to vote for Lib Dems because they're useless. Who will we vote for? The Greens. They don't count. And then as the polls start to go up, all these crazy policies, and they're not policies, they're just ideas and statements come out, and everyone's trying to repeat them as policies, and then they suddenly go, oh, we're not being held to account. We've never been held to account before. Oh.
But this is the problem. Are they really being held to account? Because they're in the position now to genuinely take over about 3 or 4 councils in the forthcoming elections. And I always argue that, frankly, in Westminster, you're probably not as close to being able to affect power and decision making as you are lower down the ranks when you're a local council. When a local authority.
Yes, but luckily in a local council they can't dictate what the drug policy is, because that's the central government, so that's in law. A local council is responsible for what? When your bins are emptied, when the potholes are filled in, looking after the elderly and making sure that you've got the care in the community and everything else that's in there, tending to gardens and parks and public spaces and libraries and all the rest of it. There's not so much...
Arguably, you could at local level, for instance, say that we are, what do they call it, like an asylum? Well, they've got a special name for these.
They could create themselves as an asylum hub and all the rest of it. And if they brought that in and they opened their local authorities up for every asylum seeker that's in there. All of a sudden, this is where democracy will come in. All of a sudden, those individuals that went, we've put our protest vote against the main parties into the Green Party, was sitting and go, oh my goodness, what have I done? In the same way that all of those that turned around and said anyone but the Tories in the last general election and voted for Keir Starmer to get in with his massive majority, a large proportion are now going, oh my goodness, they have proved that they're worse than the last lot.
I mean, yeah, there is a sort of warning signs over the last number of years about why people should pay attention and not just vote lackadaisically.
Exactly.
But what does concern me, I mean, they were talking about in terms of sort of boycotting Israeli products, and we know that we've had circumstances in some green areas where people are going door to door saying, you know, are you a Zionist?
Yeah, I know, and this is where it gets really dangerous, and you know, we should be holding them even more to account and turn around and say, so, you know, are you supporting terror organisations? Should we be? And really get into holding them to account. And now this is the role of the mainstream press, and luckily the Daily Mail have started to do this. Now we're very close to the local elections, and the Green Party may get an even bigger platform. It's important, we should have started holding them to account beforehand. If they do get the platform that the polls are suggesting they're going to get, we need to then properly get in and properly hold them to account. And actually in many of their policies, I don't see many green policies in there.
They don't care about climate change anymore. That's old hat to them. Like someone said to me, I think it's really funny that, you know, all these sort of leftists should be really supporting Trump and what he's doing in Iran if they want to just stop oil.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, we're going to be taking a short break. After that, it is the final section of the show. We're going to be talking about housing and equality laws because, well, it's quite a ridiculous circumstance where straight men Zionists and people with right-wing or gender-critical beliefs have actually been prevented from having access to housing. Persecution for political beliefs here in this country? You betcha. We're going to be discussing that just after the break.
I hope I wouldn't have used that. Well, certainly I don't remember trying to get any job for my mates.
Can you get a job? Can you help get a job for ex's mates? But don't tell the Foreign Secretary.
I don't think it's completely surprising that the Prime Minister would be so sensitive about the way in which he was dealing with a member of his senior team, and particularly a Director of Communications who's in minute-by-minute contact with the media, that he would want that kept to a very, very tight group of people at the time.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is utterly crazy. So a number of adverts that have been put up on a string of rental property listings has turned around and outwardly stated that straight men, Zionists and people with right-wing or gender-critical beliefs aren't allowed to access housing. And that is, of course, in defiance of equality laws. Adverts posted by individuals who are looking to form inclusive house shares say TERFs, SWERFs, Zionists need not apply. Zionists, pro-Israeli, please look elsewhere. A lot of adverts openly ban those with right-wing views, saying no Tories or Reform voters. Now, these are for rental homes across the country, which may indeed breach the Equality Act. And it follows another investigation by the same newspaper, The Telegraph, which found landlords illegally advertising for Muslim-only tenants. Now, these adverts that we're talking about when it says no right-wingers, no TERFs, etc., are largely found on Spare Room, which is Britain's biggest house-sharing site, and others on other house-sharing sites such as Cohabitas. Now, Spare Room's own rules state it is illegal to discriminate against someone you are renting to under any of the protected characteristics of the Equality Act. You're allowed to have a preference on your new flatmate, but you must explain it clearly and respectfully, while exclusionary wording is banned. Let's speak now to James Hummerston Pope, who is a housing expert and estate agent. Now, the difference between these two stories, the first one is about apparently landlords who have turned around and said we're only going to let out our property to Muslims, and then this one, which is more about house shares. If I were, looking for a housemate, I would probably, might not advertise, please be a Brexit voter, but I probably, I must admit, wouldn't really want a short fringe Socialist Workers' Party lunatic in my spare room, and so therefore might sort of, make my decision accordingly. But is there any sort of shaky legal ground for this sort of stuff on sites such as Spare Room?
Well, look, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. It's an interesting topic because the reality is that if you flipped this on its head and it was a different section of people saying, no Muslims and different parts of the belief spectrum, there would be uproar. The reality is that this sort of, I suppose, story is based on the fact that it's okay for certain people to discriminate, but not others. If we look at things and adverts on Spare Room, when we look at, landlords or house shares, absolutely it's okay to say female preferred, male preferred. It's when you start using, terminology that says you cannot live in this property, then it is against the Equalities Act.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. There is, more than anything, a two-tierism, a sense that, if I were to advertise my spare room on this website and say I only want white people, Brexit voters and Christians, it would cause a controversy. But then at the same time, I kind of feel like, I wouldn't want to go live with people who hated TERFs and hated right-wingers and were so sort of extreme in their beliefs that they feel the need to advertise it on a spare room slot. The other story, however, about Muslim landlords who own a property saying we will only allow Muslim tenants. Now, that is different, isn't it?
Well, it's based on belief. No, because look, people are allowed to have beliefs. They are protected, but people shouldn't be discriminated against based on the property that they would like to live in. Landlords are allowed to say when they live in a property that they have a preference to who lives there, but they are not allowed to outwardly discriminate in terms of the terminology, the wording that they use on adverts.
But this is my concern here. If you've got people entering the rental market, and in certain towns and cities of the UK there might be workers' cottages that are fairly cheap to snap up at some point, and then people hoover them up for buy to let, and then say this is done by one or two Muslim landlords, they turn around and say we only want Muslims here. You're actually then changing the complexion of an entire neighbourhood. You are not allowed to discriminate. So if me as a Christian individual wanted to go and rent that property, I should have the right to put myself forward to rent that property. I shouldn't be faced with an advert that says, as a Christian man, I am not allowed to rent it. And this is where there's a massive flaw in these sites, such as Spare Room and such as many others, that are not policing what is on the advert. They're covering themselves, saying that
it's illegal, but there's nothing stopping people from putting it in those adverts.
Also, you wonder with spare room, the people who tend to advertise spare rooms on spare room are existing tenants, not necessarily the landlord or the owner of the property. Do you think that people who own the properties are remotely aware that maybe their tenants are saying, oh, you know, we're in a 5-bed, 6-bed house share, a room's come available, but you've got to be an extreme leftist?
Probably not. No, probably not. And the reality is the landlord's probably thinking, great, I've got my tenants in there. If they need to rent out another room, as long as that person passes referencing, I'm fine. They're probably not vetting what the advert says as long as they get their rent in. And look, let me be clear. You know, if there's a 5-bed house, 4 rooms are, you know, female occupied, I can very much understand why they would want to say female preferred. But again, you cannot exclude.
Very interesting. But like you said, it's always one rule for them and another rule for us. You can come be my housemate, though, James, as a fellow Christian. I'm sure you've got plenty of places you could live as a housing expert. But, you know, if ever you find yourself in trouble, you're more than welcome. Right, James Hummerstone Pope, thank you ever so much. And thank you as well to you, Mr. Ingram. It's always a delight and a pleasure having your company for a full 3 hours. It's like St George's Day has come right on time. Right, now, special episode, special programme, special show on Talk coming next, because one of the greats, one of the big beasts of the British media, our very own Harry Cole, who's busy in America trying to save the West, is taking over the throne for the next 3 hours. Let's say hello to Harry. How you doing, son?
Hi, Alex. Long time no see.
I know. Well, I sort of vaguely see you now on a tiny little screen. How are things over stateside?
Well, it's never a dull day here. It makes British politics look relatively calm and stable. It's ups and downs. You've got the war in Iran, you've got Donald Trump, you've got crucial midterms coming up, all sorts of crazy things. But I'm not getting FOMO just yet. But I have to say, watching Keir Starmer drive the British government off a cliff, well, there's a certain sense of I told you so there.
What do you make of this Hermer stuff, by the way? Because I've been on to this man for 2 years, well, 2 years, but pretty much since the anointing of this government, I said there's a lot of stuff on this guy, a direct appointment. Has he been vetted? What are all the interconnections now with Chagos, China, Mandelson, the persecution of troops? I mean, I can't think of anyone less suitable to being the Attorney General than him. And I feel like, why is it taken so long for people to go after him?
Alex, you're so right. I mean, there doesn't seem to be a case that Richard Hermer hasn't wanted to pursue against Britain. Well, we knew about his work for Jerry Adams, of all people. You know, he's a trendy, left-wing, progressive, North London, liberal lawyer. And, you know, obviously, a Prime Minister like Keir Starmer is in awe of him. They used to work together. They were buddies. He basically brought him in unexpectedly when he came into government, and now we're literally slowly picking through a long career of arguing against our country. And it's no surprise that he was on the side of the lawyers pursuing a witch hunt against British troops, because they were all those trendy lot were.
I've always thought that it's about time America asked to subpoena all the documents around the Chagos Islands giveaway as well, because I reckon there's some dirty stuff buried in that. And if anyone could get that information out, I'd hope the Congress can. How is our special relationship that side of the pond?
You know what? It's not great, Alex. I mean, the special relationship is bigger than just, you know, Donald Trump and Keir Starmer or whichever who's in power of the day. It's so deep. It's in security, defense, satellite, space, you know, on the seas, under the seas, in the skies. It's massive, you know, and it is meant to be, you know, the word is there, special, and it's not really about politics. It's about security. And it's not just Donald Trump that's angry with the fact that Britain not just didn't go along with the Iran bombing, but they actively frustrated it.